Welcome to Bloomberg's global TV and radio audience. This is special coverage of the Democratic National Convention. Live from Chicago, alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
Tonight, Vice President Kamala Harris officially accepts the Democratic nomination for president, making history as the first woman of color to ever do so.
Her headline speech tonight is one she was not expecting to give until just a month ago, when she vaulted to the top of the ticket after President Biden's decision to leave the race. It could be the biggest moment of her political career and a chance for her to reintroduce herself to the nation.
Building the momentum towards her address, Governors Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan and Roy Cooper of North Carolina and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly speaks tonight, joining a long list of high-profile Democrats who have taken the podium this week in Chicago, making the case for the nominee.
It's been the honor of my lifetime to serve as your president. I love the job, but I love my country more.
We refused to give up on America. Millions marched, many ran for office. We kept our eyes on the future. Well, my friends, the future is here.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems since he rode down his golden escalator 9 years ago.
I want to know, who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
More than anything else, let us choose freedom. Why? Because that's the best of America. We're all Americans, and together, let's all choose Kamala Harris.
It's the fourth quarter. We're down a field goal, but we're on offense and we've got the ball. We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
It has been an energized several nights in the United Center here in Chicago, and certainly this finale night is no different. Joining us now live from the floor in the convention center, just blocks away, is Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern. Anne-Marie, what is the energy on this Kamala Harris night?
Good evening, guys. The energy is absolutely electric on the floor this evening. I'm hanging out with the New York delegation this evening, and I just caught up with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. He's calling it a 1-2 punch. What he says is they need to make sure that they get Kamala Harris elected and restore democracy. I asked him what happened that day in Delaware, because he and Nancy Pelosi are part of the reason why you have a new top of the ticket. He says he will not talk about that. I pushed him a little bit on when are we going to hear policies from Kamala Harris. A lot of people are interested in that. He said the housing policy he thinks is a very good start. And then, of course, next year is what Senator Mark Warner is calling tax Armageddon. And Senator Schumer said to me there will be no cap on SALT if he remains Senate Majority Leader. So that's a little bit of a flavor here, but the floor is absolutely electric, waiting for Kamala Harris to come. This is really an important moment for her. Remember, just a month ago, it was supposed to be President Joe Biden speaking this evening.
Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern with us from the floor of the convention. Anne-Marie, thank you. We've got some big speakers tonight on the way, of course, culminating with Kamala Harris, but some of the other Democratic luminaries that we're going to be hearing from, including the governor of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, will be among those addressing the crowd tonight. Gretchen Whitmer from the swing state of Michigan. Kaylee, just some of the names that we'll be following over the course of the evening as we talk with some of the best minds in the business here at Bloomberg.
Indeed. And two of them are joining us now. Bloomberg's Peggy Collins, our Washington bureau chief, and Mario Parker, who leads our White House and politics coverage. Welcome to you both. It certainly has been a very busy week here in Chicago. All of the momentum, though, building up to tonight, in which Kamala Harris is going to make some history when she formally accepts this nomination. She has, of course, been vice president for over 3.5 years now. Theoretically, that would mean the country knows her. But this is a chance, Mario, for her to either redefine or, for the first time, define herself to many voters.
Yeah, she's got a rare, there's this really historical moment here where she's been tied to the Biden ticket, but is coming out as the change candidate. That's the way the Democrats are trying to frame her candidacy here. And it seems to be that voters are buying it as well, right? They're not giving her the same sour marks in the economy and other issues that they had given the top of the ticket with Biden.
Well, as we look across the course of this evening, we're going to hear a lot of messaging from the Democratic Party, and how consistent it will be with what's considered Joe Biden's Democratic Party remains a question. To what extent can Kamala Harris strike a difference with Joe Biden tonight?
Well, I think she's trying to strike a difference in some ways. She's talking less about Bidenomics and more about cost of living, you know, really leaning into the fact that she grew up in the middle class and that she'll have policies around housing and costs that will help the middle class hang on to that position rather than even climb into it, which is something that a lot of Americans are feeling right now. I think freedom has been a big word here this week as well. They're really leaning into that. And then also leaning into the thought that they are the change, they are the hope to bring this country together. I will say the other thing that we've heard all week is that people still feel like the race is going to be very close, so that the battleground states are still really important, and getting the ground game going out there, getting volunteers in states like North Carolina, which they're feeling much better about, and Roy Cooper's, the governor there, is going to speak tonight, will be really key to whether or not she can win.
Well, and as we consider some of those battleground states, some of them are quite literally on the border, like Arizona, where Donald Trump was today as he tries to counter-program this convention. I know, Peggy, you've spent time at the border yourself. Should we expect, knowing Republicans have been attacking Kamala Harris as the quote-unquote border czar, that she's going to try to redefine herself on that issue as well tonight? Will she touch it?
I think it's possible she will. It is one of those things that they are going to pound time and time again. Border security and the economy have been the two biggest issues throughout this whole campaign, whether it was Biden at the top of the ticket or Harris. And I do think it is one of the places where she will need to define herself more between now and November to counter the Republican attacks.
Mario, you covered the Trump White House. He's going to be watching tonight, probably more closely than most people in America. It's been interesting watching him counter-program this convention each day this week. How careful does the Democratic presentation need to be tonight to not fulfill this billing of a dangerous San Francisco liberal?
Well, yeah, what you'll see is Kamala Harris, some of the surrogates that she has, right? Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, but more importantly, to the question of the border, Mark Kelly in Arizona, right? That kind of gives you a semblance that they haven't been running away from the issues as much. While they haven't been giving out policy prescriptions as much, they still have been trying to counterpunch the Harris campaign, that is, and they're really trying to figure out a way to, or navigate this thing where she won't be branded as Kamala or Comrade Kamala, yes, for example.
Yeah, as Donald Trump has tried to do. It's also worth noting, as we consider the speakers that are teeing her up tonight, Peggy, some of them are vulnerable members of the Senate. Bob Casey will speak tonight, for example. Colin Allred, who's trying to flip Ted Cruz's Republican seat in Tennis Blue, will also speak tonight. This is not just about trying to win the presidential race, is it?
No, absolutely. And as Anne-Marie just showed with Schumer there on the floor, one of the things that caused the change in the ticket was the fear that the Democrats would lose not only the White House, but the House and the Senate. And that is something that we could see here has really changed this week, that they feel like the map has not only changed on the presidential race, bringing in the Sun Belt as a possibility and not just having to win the blue wall, but also that they have much more possibility on the House and Senate side. And that's where policy is really made, like things like border security and immigration law would be there, that they could get some change like they did under Obama.
So to what extent then does that require a Democratic House and Senate to enact all of the ideas we're going to hear tonight?
Well, that's the gamble that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer made when they agitated for President Biden to drop himself off of the ticket, that they at least have a chance to win those two chambers with someone else on the ticket, and that happens to be Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Indeed. Bloomberg's Mario Parker and Peggy Collins kicking off our special coverage here in Chicago this evening. Thank you both so much as we continue to keep an eye on what's happening in the United States Center, one speaker after another on the stage. And of course, it is worth pointing out that the run of show has been running a little bit behind, and the headline speakers, Joe, have been not in prime time for the last 3 nights.
Are we already behind here tonight?
I guess that's the question.
Check the schedule here.
Yeah, we'll
following along, so you don't have
continue to consult that. And of course, you can stick with us for our special coverage here of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome back to special coverage of the Democratic National Convention, live from Chicago on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew on this night 4, the night in which Kamala Harris will accept the Democratic nomination for president. And as we look ahead to her remarks later on this evening, joining us now here in studio is Joe Trippi. He is senior advisor to the Lincoln Project and Democratic strategist. He has run Democratic presidential campaigns in the past. Joe, welcome to Bloomberg. Always great to have you. We were speaking before the show about how you have been at every convention since 1980.
Yeah.
How different
I'm that old. Yeah.
does this, not to age you, you just have experience.
Yes.
So with all of that experience, characterize this convention for us. How different has it been?
It is the most energized, the most unified from day one that I've ever been, ever seen. I mean, I've been to both parties' conventions along the line, and it's even more energetic and more unified than the 2008 Obama convention, which for sure would have been if you asked me before this one, which was the one that, stuck out, that was it. This one is surpassing that in terms of the energy.
It's interesting because that's what we heard all week in Milwaukee as well. This was about the unity convention, and we're the most unified. So let's assume that, I guess, both parties are unified and it becomes a contest of real contrasting messages. What we saw on the final night in Milwaukee was Hulk Hogan,
right?
It was Kid Rock, and then Donald Trump in the speech that kept us up pretty late. What are we going to get tonight in contrast to that?
I think the contrast has happened every night. I mean, I just think that this is going to be a speech that Kamala Harris is going to give that's going to reach out to the entire country. It's not going to be, I doubt very much there's going to be, I think it's going to show that contrast. It's not, they doubled down on sort of, the UFC championship, the World Wrestling Federation.
The tearing open of T-shirts.
The tearing open of T-shirts. And I think in J.D. Vance, in a way that just sort of doubled down on going after white men, seemed to be their big target. And this convention is showing massive diversity, including Republicans. I mean, for the first time, it's not just the diverse Democratic Party, but there's Adam Kinzinger and Duncan from Georgia. Yeah. And so you're seeing, I think, that's what I think is is that contrast of just, it's everybody, all of us together. We've got a bright future. It's going to take work, but we can get there, versus a lot of that convention was a lot of doom and gloom. I know they were excited on the floor, but it came across with a lot of anger and vitriol, I thought.
Well, so as you make the point that they're trying to bring some R's into the tent, they're going after the I's as well. Yes. Independence, something that Oprah Winfrey spoke about last night.
Well, you know what? You're looking at a registered independent who's proud to vote again and again and again because I'm an American and that's what Americans do. Voting is the best of America. And I have always, since I was eligible to vote, I've always voted my values. And that is what is needed in this election now more than ever. So I'm calling on all you independents and all you undecideds.
The independents and the undecideds. Joe, what message from Kamala Harris wins them over?
Again, I think independents and the undecideds were largely looking at the Biden-Trump race, and were unhappy with that race. They were, and I think Kamala Harris has really been able to both defend the Biden record and her role in it, at the same time turn and say, this is my campaign, it's my race, it's my policies, and join together with hope and joy and fun. I mean, for a lot of ways, politics has not been that fun for the last 9 years. People were turning it off. I think she's getting people who are tuned out to start paying attention again. And when they do, they like what they're seeing. I think vice presidential nominee Governor Walz has added to that. So I think, when he is, I think he was a great pick because he's just well-spoken, authentic, real, from a town of 400 people.
The folksiness.
And it's like, look, in my town, we didn't agree with each other, but we were all neighbors and we looked out for each other. I think people want that America again. They don't want the America where we don't talk to each other. You see somebody who was your good friend 4, 6, 7 years ago that we no longer talk to. We don't talk to each other. We start walking the other way. And I think Trump represents more of that. And this campaign, this candidacy of Harris-Walz represents that let's be neighbors. We may not agree, but come together, independents, Republicans, Democrats, all together, like face the future, solve our problems together. And I think that's the contrast. I don't think it's necessarily a policy contrast. I mean, I know there will be policy attacks going both ways, but I don't really think that's what's changed the dynamic of the race.
There was a really interesting moment this week as the campaign and the party crystallized the message for this moment, and it came from Michelle Obama as she spoke, I think, to Donald Trump, as well as an important Democratic cause. Let's listen.
She understands that most of us will never be afforded the grace of failing forward. We will never benefit from the affirmative action of generational wealth. We don't get to change the rules so we always win. If we see a mountain in front of us, we don't expect there to be an escalator waiting to take us to the top.
Kind of threading the needle on the ruling on affirmative action while also needling Donald Trump at the same time. So how much is the message from this party in opposition to the former president versus its own agenda?
I think you're going to see more and more the agenda take over. I think Donald Trump is doing a great job of reminding people why they don't want to go back to that era where he was president again. And a lot of the early polling I've seen are showing that upwards of 53% of them, I'm not talking in the vote yet, but 53% of the American people are saying they really see him as a threat and they do not intend to vote for him. So the real problem was going to be, do they stay home? Some of that 53%, do they stay home? Do they vote for a third party? Or would they sort of grudgingly decide to vote for Biden? Yeah. And I think that group is now moving to Kamala Harris. And so I think that's why I think there will be a bigger post-convention bump than people think. I mean, that it will grow. I know she had a pre-convention bump, but I think it will grow another few points because of that.
So as we think about what life looks like for Kamala Harris after the convention, reminding us that you've run presidential campaigns before, you ran Howard Dean's presidential campaign. If you were running this campaign, where does she allot her time and resources? Knowing Joe Biden seemed very focused just on those 3 blue wall states, should she be spending time and money in Arizona, in North Carolina? How do you divvy it up?
Oh, yeah, no. We've seen a huge shift. I mean, the blue wall states, they're still close, but she's opened up there. She's clearly opened up a lead in Arizona and North Carolina. Georgia's a dead heat, and I think she may even have Nevada may be close too. But no, I think you're going to see a concentration that goes well beyond the 3 blue wall states. I think both North Carolina, Biden only lost North Carolina by 74,000 votes, and Georgia even when you have Duncan, the lieutenant governor of Georgia, endorsing her.
And Donald Trump
attacking Brian Kemp, the governor, very popular governor. I mean, yeah, even Georgia could fall. That might be the one that's the tougher one. But no, I think the Trump campaign really has to be off balance right now with the sea change that's happened. And I think the bigger problem for the Harris campaign is not expanding your vision too big. Don't look at Florida where they're down only by a few points and decide, no, let's go spend $80 million there. No, take it to North Carolina and Georgia, or the states where you really think you can do it. Don't try to go for it all. But I think we're in the best position that anybody could have dreamed of 6-7 weeks ago. No one would have seen this coming the way it's come. Yeah.
Well, it's great to compare notes with you here in Chicago at the DNC. Thanks for being with us at the table. That's Joe Trippi, of course, senior advisor to the Lincoln Project, Democratic strategist. We thank you for coming along tonight on Bloomberg. Coming up, we continue our special coverage of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is special coverage of the Democratic National Convention on Bloomberg TV and radio. We're live in Chicago. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kayleigh Lyons, counting down to the main event tonight. This is the grand finale as Vice President Kamala Harris accepts her party's nomination, making history in this campaign just weeks after Joe Biden dropped out of the race. Kayleigh, so much has happened in the last month. We actually have to remind ourselves of how much we've packed into just 4 weeks.
No, it's been an incredibly rapid pace of movement, and frankly, time is not going to slow down as after tonight it begins the 75-day sprint to November, an actual the actual election day. And of course, this is the biggest chance Kamala Harris will have, likely, to speak on her own, not in a debate form, to American voters and try to plead the case as to why they should elect her. We're getting some excerpts from her speech now, and we know she plans to say she will be a realistic, practical president.
That's right, as Donald Trump accuses her of being a dangerous liberal. Of course, it's not just the audience here in the U.S. I think we can argue that the world will be watching tonight. And we want to bring in a special guest to talk about it. Dave Merritt, head of Bloomberg Media Editorial, has made his way to Chicago as well, helping us in our coverage. It's great to see you at the table tonight. You've been in the hall and you've felt the energy here. It's different when you're watching from around the world. And to the extent that the UK and Europe, your area of expertise, are also being reintroduced to Kamala Harris means what tonight?
That's right, or maybe introduced for the first time.
Yeah.
And the extraordinary theatre of this convention doesn't really have an equivalent in other parts of the world. So, I mean, we have conventions in Britain. They're a slightly more low-key affair. You use the phrase grand finale then, which I think is the right one for the excitement, the buzz that is around this place, wild rumours about which celebrities are going to be popping up on stage or performing. It is a piece of grand political theatre, which is very captivating. And I think, the world is always very interested in American elections, but this one particularly, the stakes for the rest of the world, people feel, are very high. So everyone is very gripped. And it's also a very tight election. That's the thing. This is on a knife edge. The last election that we had in the UK, the only debate was the scale of the loss of the government. It wasn't really in doubt. Here, it is too close to call, despite a lot of the optimism that we're feeling in the hall. So everyone is very gripped by this cliffhanger result that we're going to see. And all of this razzmatazz around it certainly helps.
Well, and we also have to consider just a week before the Republican convention, Joe, was the NATO summit in Washington, where there were all these questions around President Biden's age. He said that leaders were not interacting with him differently. All they were telling him at that time was he needs to win because they were worried about Donald Trump. Does that not still remain the case, that actually what other countries are watching is not who the Democratic nominee is, but whether or not they can just defeat the Republican nominee of Donald Trump?
Yeah, anyone but Trump, I think, privately, probably in a lot of European capitals and beyond, that would be the sentiment. And you mentioned NATO. This is the most important thing. There is a war raging in Europe with no signs yet of a resolution. Now, within Russia itself as well, the situation feels very unstable in Eastern Europe, and NATO itself has been called into question by Donald Trump. And so there's an enormous amount of nervousness about what a return to the White House for him would mean. And therefore, yes, I think you're right. Whoever's in the seat for the Dems, who cares, really, as long as it's not a return to...
Is it who cares that they see no sunlight between a Kamala Harris or Joe Biden?
Well, maybe that's not completely fair. I think there was a lot of nervousness for the same reason that there was here around the durability, the endurance of President Biden. Was he up to the task? And that brought with it its own sense of insecurity and instability as well. So I think the very appealing thing for the global investors as well as politicians when they see Kamala Harris is this renewed vigor and energy and confidence as well, which will allay all of those fears that were starting to swirl around Biden from all around the world.
All right, head of Bloomberg Media Editorial, Dave Merritt, here in Chicago with us. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Joe, it's one thing to consider how Europe is watching this, another to think about adversaries, not just Russia, which Dave was talking about, but China as well. It's pretty clear where Donald Trump and J.D. Vance stand on China, at least economically, in regard to tariffs. But I wonder if that's going to work its way into Kamala Harris's remarks tonight at all.
Sure, that's true. Knowing that voters tend not to key off of geopolitics a lot, if we do get into it, it'll probably be pretty high-level stuff. The excerpts that you just referred to don't bring too much detail to policy tonight. We have to remind ourselves that this is a convention and not a policy paper.
Indeed. But of course, we're still covering it for you. Special coverage, in fact, of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago. And we'll have much more still ahead on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is special coverage of the Democratic National Convention, live from Chicago on Bloomberg TV and radio. It is night 4. Kamala Harris, just hours from now, will formally accept the Democratic nomination for president. This is something she wasn't expecting to do up until about 4 weeks ago. This is a race that has very much changed and, of course, still has the potential to change further, because once we leave this convention, it is go time, and it is a 75-day sprint until Election Day.
Yeah, that's right. We've got an eye on the convention floor for you, as we've seen some programs drift into the very late hours of the night and early morning on the East Coast over the past several evenings. So far, we're only about 5 minutes behind schedule, so there's a fair chance that we could see the Vice President, Kamala Harris, accept that nomination before 10 p.m. Eastern time, and that is the schedule for now. Kaylee, in the meantime, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Governor Roy Cooper, and others right now, Maxwell Frost, the member of Congress representing the youngest element of the Democratic Conference, taking the podium right now.
And he, of course, is from the state of Florida, something we've heard a little bit about here in Chicago this week as we consider the map and the path for Kamala Harris. So joining us now with more on that is Matt Bennett. He is Democratic strategist and third way executive vice president for public affairs. He is live outside the United Center for us this evening. Matt, great to see you back here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We were just speaking with Joe Trippi, who, of course, has run presidential campaigns in the past. He suggested that, yes, there's a lot of energy here, but that Kamala Harris and her campaign should not take that as justification, essentially, to overshoot, to go after a state like Florida. When everybody leaves Chicago, what does this campaign need to do to make the most of the next 75 days and actually win come November 5th?
You know, I really agree with Joe Trippi. I think, first of all, Florida has broken our hearts time after time after time, and it could be kind of fool's gold. It looks glittery, but I think it's probably out of reach. What we need to do as a party, what the Harris team needs to do, is focus on 7 states. Everyone knows this. This is where the battle will be fought. And this is my 9th Democratic convention. I've been to 8 before. We're 4-4 coming out of our conventions. We're always excited. We always think we're going to win. Sometimes we do, but I think coming out of this one, we got to be clear that this election is tied and we got to fight hard.
So with that said, what's your advice for Kamala Harris tonight? Because we need to get through the whole program here before the roadshow and the rest of the money trail continues here. Matt, how does she best use her time to get into living rooms in suburban America?
You know, I worked for a vice president, and I can tell you that people don't know much about the vice president. They know who she is, of course. They know a little bit about her. But she really needs to use tonight to reintroduce herself to this massive audience. The ratings, by the way, as you know, have been off the charts for this convention, much higher than the Republican convention. Tonight's will be the biggest. And she needs to tell America who she is, what she has done, but most importantly, what she plans to do for them. Not a list of policy details, not a, she's not going to recite dry, boring policy things. What she needs to talk about is her vision for the future. How does she believe that she and Tim Walz can make this country better and make life better for middle-class Americans? That is, I think, her challenge. It's hard to do that in 35 minutes or so, but I think that's what she has to do.
Well, Matt, most of our conversations here in Chicago this week, and frankly about this race for the most part, have been about the Harris-Walz ticket, or what now is the Harris-Walz ticket, versus the Trump-Vance ticket. There is still technically another dog or two in this fight as well, including RFK Jr., but reportedly he is going to drop out of this race tomorrow. He could even endorse former President Donald Trump, and that's something Trump himself spoke about in Arizona earlier today. Take a listen.
There are rumors that he's going to make an endorsement. That would be a great honor for me. Great honor.
And Matt, obviously, you at Third Way spent a great deal of time earlier in this cycle going after no labels specifically for the threat it may have posed, the spoiler it could have been. If RFK does indeed drop out and endorse Donald Trump, does the Harris strategy need to change at all? Does that actually make this race even tighter?
It might make the race marginally tighter, and having Trump say it's a great honor to be endorsed by a guy like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has admitted that he sexually assaulted his kid's babysitter, that he has done all kinds of weird things, that he's a conspiracy theorist. That's not much of an honor. And I don't think he brings a whole bunch of votes with him, but I do think it's important because there are a lot of voters out there maybe conservative, maybe have.
All right, Matt Bennett from Third Way joining us in front of the United Center in Chicago. I think we got our signal interrupted there. We'll do our best to reconnect with Matt because he's been down this road, to his point, before. Yeah. And by the way, spent a lot of time working with the former President Bill Clinton, who spoke last evening and was received as a hero, remembering him as a pretty complex figure at times in the Democratic Party. But it kind of speaks to this mood in Chicago where everyone's coming together no matter their place of origin.
Yeah, and as we heard from Joe Trippi, who's been at several of these conventions, he suggests that this is the most united convention he's seen from the jump. Yes, it is night 4, but the energy was pretty vibrant on night 1 as well. And of course, we're continuing to monitor the floor of the United Center as we see speakers. We just saw Congressman Maxwell Frost of Florida, of course, as you alluded to, the young vote that is coming up here, as well as we consider this campaign's reach out to these different demographics of voters that were starting to turn away from Biden, or at least not willing really to vote for him. And Matt Bennett, I understand you're back with us now live from outside the United Center. As we think about the different demographics that Biden was struggling to retain, that Kamala Harris does seem, polling suggests, to have reignited enthusiasm in, how does she message to some of these groups of voters, be them Latino voters, black voters, knowing she's making history tonight as a woman of color, accepting a major party's nominee for President of the United States?
Yes, I think some of that just comes from her own biography, the story that she's going to tell about her rise as a mixed-race woman who has married a Jewish man, who has lived in a very multicultural society and has risen to enormous heights. And I think that is going to be part of the outreach. But then I think there's going to be specific things that she talks about. Her vision for the future really is broad and inclusive. This is the biggest tent that I've ever seen in American politics, and the most united our party has ever been. We want voters who may have voted for Donald Trump last time. We want voters who voted for Nikki Haley. Donald Trump said he doesn't want those voters. We will gladly take them. And Kamala Harris is going to make that very clear. She's going to do outreach not only to people who look and sound like her, but to people who don't. And that, I think, is a big part of why we are optimistic about this race.
Well, to that extent, there's going to be a Republican on the stage tonight, Matt, Adam Kinzinger, who, of course, Donald Trump, I think, calls a rhino. He was a member of the January 6th committee. But you've got a former Republican lawmaker on the stage tonight, obviously somebody who we would consider in the middle at this point of the campaign. These are the voters that Democrats and Republicans are fighting over. What do you do with a message like that on a night that celebrates Democrats?
Well, all week we have been hearing from Republicans. Last night we heard from Stephanie Grisham, who worked for Donald Trump in the White House. We've heard from Jeff Duncan, who was the lieutenant governor of Georgia and an elected Republican. And they keep saying the same thing, which is, I don't recognize our party anymore. Our party has become kind of a cult to Donald Trump and the greater glory of Donald Trump. And as Bill Clinton said, all Trump ever talks about is himself, me, 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 me. Adam Kinzinger and Jeff Duncan and others don't believe that that's what American politics is about. And I think it's very important for the American public to hear from them because they have a real choice to make. There are only two people that could become president. One is Kamala Harris, who will make a case for herself, and the other is Trump. And we need to make sure they understand what choosing Trump would mean.
All right, Matt, it's good to see you here in Chicago. Good luck getting back inside. Matt Bennett of Third Way stepping out of the United Center for our conversation tonight in special coverage of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago. Coming up, we'll continue that coverage from Chicago. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is special coverage of the Democratic National Convention on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Chicago, where we have spent the week bringing you the sights and sounds of this convention. that looks and sounds a lot different than we thought just 4 weeks ago. Of course, the culmination this evening as Vice President Kamala Harris accepts her party's nomination. Kaylee, that's set to happen just about an hour from now, surprisingly, if things stay on schedule, which would be a far cry from what we've seen so far this week.
Well, and it does seem like things are running mostly on time in the United Center. We just saw a Senate candidate, current Representative Colin Allred of Texas, addressing the stage here in the United Center. And of course, he is one of the ones that we're watching. The odds are long, but a potential Democrat who could flip a Republican Senate seat blue. He's running against Ted Cruz in Texas. A new YouGov, University of Houston survey that came out today shows Ted Cruz only up 2 points in that race. And interesting to see him getting a slot on this final night of the convention.
Yeah, we can certainly say that would be Ted Cruz's race to lose at this stage, but those numbers jump off the page to consider that's the state of Texas, and it really brings up the idea of the rising tide lifting all boats as Kamala Harris has made her way back to the top of the ticket here. She again will be speaking from the convention floor, from the stage, roughly an hour from now. There are a lot of questions about some of the entertainment that might coincide, Kaylee, with her address, but we'll keep you posted on what we learn. Joining us right now is Tabitha Bonilla, political science professor at Northwestern University. Tabitha, we thank you for joining us just outside the United Center here in Chicago. How local and how specific does Kamala Harris need to get tonight in her address, or is this about a broad vision for the future?
I think it's about a broad vision for the future, but I think the other thing that I've heard tonight and across the week is a reminder of all the things that Kamala Harris has done, which suggests what she will do in the future.
Well, and it's obviously certain groups that she is trying to reach with this message. You have focused a lot of your research specifically on Latino voters. We have seen already in polling a suggestion that their enthusiasm in this election cycle has shifted since Harris became the candidate. And we got to catch up earlier this week with Frankie Miranda. He's president and CEO of the Hispanic Federation. And this is what he had to say about Harris's appeal to Hispanic voters. Take a listen.
Where is the opportunity? The opportunity is still that there is a portion of Latinos that still are unsure about these overall policy platforms. So that is the moment in which we need to start doing more work. The campaign needs to do more work in doing the culturally competent, linguistically competent approach to address these issues with our community.
What does your work in this community, Professor, suggest about the kind of message that Kamala Harris needs to deliver? Is it an economic one?
It is an economic one, but I also think it's about how she talks about the border. And I think we've seen a little bit of that throughout the convention, this careful balance about the need for security along the southern border, along with this idea of the humanitarian crisis that's there and the need to think about immigration in a way that considers people and their plight. So I think economic needs will certainly address this immigration issue, but they'll also address what working Latino families have here in the United States.
Just a month ago, before Joe Biden left the race, Tabitha, there was a narrative of Latino voters turning to Donald Trump. To what extent has Kamala Harris reversed that?
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember that even though the proportion of Latino voters voting Democrat had decreased, it still was the majority of Latino voters. And I think that we've seen a little bit of rise in the poll among Latinos of people being more eager to vote for Kamala Harris compared to Joe Biden. I think it's also critical to note that Latinos represent one of the youngest voting blocs in the country. And so this shift to the Harris-Walz campaign has seen a lot of energizing among young voters, which includes young Latino voters. So I think this is also a really important piece of what's been happening with this shift to the new ticket.
Well, obviously, Professor, Kamala Harris is not a Latina, but she is an Indian American. She is a Black American. Donald Trump has questioned her racial identity when it comes to both, suggesting that she's kind of flip-flopping between identities. How should we be thinking about the identity of race and how it is at play in this election cycle for not just Indian Americans and Black Americans, but Latino Americans as well?
Yeah, I think biracial identities are really complicated for people to understand. Often when race is talked about in the U.S., it's talked about on a white-black binary, and we don't think as much about brown people, or we don't think as much about people who carry multiple heritages. And I think the discussion around Kamala Harris is really reflecting the lack of attention to biracial identity that has been given, and it's complex, right? You are both things at once. You are not one or the other. And I think Donald Trump's attempts to kind of weaken her affinity toward black voters by suggesting that she isn't black, we've certainly seen that. But I don't know that a lot of voters bought that. But the other thing that I've seen her do is to emphasize not just her racial background, but to also emphasize that, she is a child of people who immigrated to the United States, who came here and did really, great things with their education and their research. And I think she's tried to make that appeal as well, which might translate to Latino voters who tend to focus often on immigration.
All right, Professor Tabitha Bonilla of Northwestern University, thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And coming up, we'll have much more ahead. We'll be joined by our signature political panel, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, as we continue our special coverage of the Democratic National Convention live in Chicago, right here on Bloomberg. Welcome to live special coverage of the Democratic National Convention on Bloomberg TV and radio. Watching on Bloomberg TV and listening on Bloomberg Radio, you hear the sound of drums as percussionists rev up the crowd in the United Center here in Chicago. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew. And of course, this is just one of the many musical performances we are expecting this evening. The national anthem will be sung by the Chicks.
Yes, indeed.
Joe, we understand that Pink will be performing later this evening.
Come down on wires? Is that something?
I guess we're all going to have to stay tuned to find out, just like we will have to see if the rumors of Beyonce performing prove to be true. TMZ and The Hill reporting that she will indeed be making a surprise performance on stage here in Chicago.
I'm just going to remind everyone that Kaylee started that rumor here in Chicago, and now suddenly it appears to be catching hold. Is she here? Do we know for a fact in the city, or this is just reports so far?
This is reports. Again, The Hill and TMZ. So two sources we have, and we'll wait for confirmation.
Absolutely. I wonder what the panel thinks of this. Rick Davis, who's planned a convention, is on board. Partner at Stonecourt Capital, of course. Jeanne Zaino, Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Welcome to both of you. You're excited as everyone else here, I can tell, but that's your job tonight as the Democrat. How does Kamala Harris bring the rest of the crowd in the fold tonight?
Well, she's got a job to do. I mean, she, first of all, if Beyonce is there, I think she has done her job, but we'll have to see about that. But she's going to have to introduce herself, and not just to the people in the room who, as you were talking about, are very excited by all of the big party, but to the people at home. She's going to have to differentiate herself from Donald Trump. She's going to have to share what her plans are, what she is going to do. And I think we're going to hear an awful lot from her about her patriotism, because that is something where she feels, again, she can differentiate herself from Donald Trump, who she says, like Bill Clinton said last night, is all about him or I. She's saying, I am here. My mother taught me the way I grew up for you in the middle class of America, and this is how I'm going to serve, and that is patriotic. So I think that's what we'll hear. And again, I'm hoping that Beyonce makes a show of it.
Now the focus.
Oh, you and me both,
Kaylee.
Jeanne. Of course, we have to consider the audiences, plural, that she is speaking to. One of the audiences, obviously, is the physical audience here in Chicago, Rick. This is the Democratic Party faithful. They are going to be loudly cheering for her, surely. The other audience are those watching at home. We have our audience watching and listening here at Bloomberg as well, who are probably going to be looking for some specific policy points from her. The question is going to be, do those other audiences want that? Is that what she needs to give them tonight?
Yeah, look, we're in the era where you can dish up whatever any individual wants, whether they're watching network news or whether they're at the hands of the influencers that have been invited to this convention, the content producers, or otherwise, on TikTok, on X, and all those other platforms. So one way or another, it's going to find its way to an audience. So the question you ask is a good one. So what are they going to give them? I think they're in the process of having to make that decision that they got to give them a little bit of everything, right? So she's got to make the base happy. She's going to give a little bit of that, and they'll do that in the arena. That'll be easy to do. She's got to be able to convey a message to swing voters, and the swing voters are going to care about her positions on things like the economy, security, crime, and so she's got to show some leg there. She's got to give something so those influencers that they've packed into the lounge and are expecting to reach, frankly, more people than the network television audience, they need something to be able to reproduce and send out through their channels. And so if they don't give them that, I think they're going to be missing an opportunity.
We've talked so much about her opportunity to reintroduce herself, or too many introduce herself. Jeanne, and the excerpts that we've seen from the speech are largely biographical. She will say, the path that led me here in recent weeks was no doubt unexpected, but I'm no stranger to unlikely journeys, which unlocks a number of stories that she's going to tell. Is that time well spent?
It certainly is. And she will tie that into her vision for what she's going to do for middle America. So, for example, I think we will hear or continue to hear a lot about her life as a prosecutor. I mean, a lot of Americans, even though she is vice president, don't realize she started out as a prosecutor. How did a young black woman end up as a prosecutor? That is not something that is a common path. She didn't become a defense attorney. She then served as the attorney general in California, the largest state in the country. And then she went on to the Senate and, of course, the vice presidency. So all of those things are going to tie in. And I do think on policies, we will hear about crime. We will hear about the border, and we will hear about the economy, because even though we keep saying Donald Trump should focus on those issues because he'll win on those, Democrats feel they have a winning message to sell on all of those. Crime is down under Biden. Immigration, illegal immigration is down. Inflation is down. So they feel they have a story to tell. She's part of that story, and she's going to go to those areas, I think. Not a lot of specifics, but in terms of her visions for what she will do for middle America.
Well, I will say they seem to be doing a better job staying on time so far. Are we following along pretty well? It's been within about 10 minutes, Rick. Some discipline here that you've been looking for. We'll see how this goes.
I hope so.
All right. The speech is scheduled, by the way, for 9:45 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll see how close we get right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We're going to bring the address to you, of course, live and unfiltered here as part of our special coverage from Chicago. And Rick and Jeanne are going to stay with us. Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors, our signature panel on a special night. Democratic National Convention coverage continues here in Chicago. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons with live images from the floor on Bloomberg TV and radio.
For Bloomberg's global TV and radio audience, welcome back to special coverage of the Democratic National Convention live from Chicago. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and we are now just about an hour away or less from the scheduled acceptance speech of Vice President Kamala Harris as she makes history as the first ever woman of color to accept a major party's presidential nomination.
That scheduled is the key word there,
yes.
Kaylee. As the crowd gets more hyped up, things tend to slow down a bit. We're going to keep tabs on the stage and on the floor for you as we work our way toward Vice President Harris's acceptance speech following several late nights here in Chicago, because this is a crowd that is apparently not interested in going home.
Yeah, well, of course, it's a crowd that Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern is literally in the middle of right now. She's joining us live from the floor of the United Center, and she is joined by a special guest, Congressman Sean Casten. Anne-Marie?
Yeah, good evening, Kaylee. It's electric here, and the congressman was just dancing along, and he's excited that he's hearing rumors, which a donor confirmed to me, that she's also hearing that Beyonce is en route. But this is an important congressman because he represents the suburbs of Chicago. It's a hometown convention for him. What are you expecting from Vice President Kamala Harris this evening?
The short answer is joy. There's just such positivity there's such just a sense of like, I mean, in our own, we've had like all of these people who are sitting here and saying, I need to be there, I need to be a part of this history, I want to get on this train and be able to tell my kids that I was a part of this. And I am sure, knowing Kamala Harris as I do, that she will continue that and bring it forward. But I just uplift a capstone. All I can say is, like, I would not envy being in her shoes and following Michelle Obama, following Barack Obama, following Hakeem Jeffries. It's big shoes to fill, but I'm sure she will.
Well, it's definitely a vibe shift. Remember, a month ago, it was supposed to be President Joe Biden making that speech this evening, which brings us to the question of the country's still getting to know her and what she stands for. She's come out with this economic policy. You sit on the Financial Services Committee. What do you make of some of these issues like price gouging, which the criticism from the Republicans is that this is price controls, it just doesn't work?
Well, you know, personally, I'm of the view that the single best economic policy is one that encourages competition in markets, and that's a lonely place in politics, right? You can be pro-business and anti-market, you can be anti-business and anti-market, and there's common ground in there. Really being pro-market is a hard place to be, and my view is like, you want to call it price gouging, I'd call it antitrust enforcement, bringing in competition, lowering barriers to entry, making it easier for entrepreneurs to thrive, because those are the things that bring prices down, because if you are price gouging, by definition, you've got some control that shouldn't be there. So we'll see what the details are, but directionally I'm okay.
Let's also talk the fact that you're a Midwesterner. How difficult is it going to be to hold the blue wall? These are going to be the most important states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Well, I'll tell you what's been super exciting just about the energy. There was a volunteer working outside. Oh, I feel like we should hold our hearts right now.
All right, guys, I'm going to send it back to you in the studio. The national anthem is on now, but it is electric in here, and we're gonna be respectful for that.
That's the way it's done, Anne-Marie. Thank you. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern giving us a front row seat on the floor of the Democratic National Convention. You want to go back to hear that?
We watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Land of the free and the home of the
And that is exactly why we're here tonight. Long before we get to the politics, the national anthem and a great rendition by the Chicks, live performance here for you on Bloomberg TV and radio as we give you a front row seat to the action on night 4 ahead of Kamala Harris's speech. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons, and we're just getting started here on Bloomberg, adding the voices now of Bloomberg's Isis Almeida and Jonathan Tamari of Bloomberg Government. Great to see both of you. Isis, your specialty here is covering Chicago as our bureau chief. There was so much talk about tens of thousands of protesters shutting down the city of Chicago. On this final night, is that story a bust?
Absolutely. I think it was very interesting to see how Chicago prepared for 1968 when we had riots all over the city. And what we really got was sunny weather, great food, and concerts by John Legend.
Worse than that.
Yeah, well, I guess that is true. And more concerts tonight from the Chicks, from Pink, perhaps even, if reports are to be believed, from Beyonce. But to your point on the protest, it does speak to an issue that has divided the Democratic Party. And even was at play, Republicans contend, in the vice presidential race. Obviously, Tim Walz accepted the nomination as vice president yesterday, but Donald Trump again last night was talking about Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, someone, of course, you've covered, Jonathan, and how basically Democrats who are voting for Democrats now, Jewish Democrats, that is, should not be considered to be properly, how do I phrase this in a politically correct way, not representing their religion, essentially. Yeah. So how is that playing here in Chicago this week?
Well, Josh Shapiro, who is very openly faithful Jewish, fully rejected that idea. He rejected the idea that anti-Semitism played into the fact that he finished second, we think, in the VP search. And I don't think those kind of comments are really going to persuade many persuadable Jewish voters to want to go and side with Donald Trump. Jewish voters vote on a lot of issues, like any demographic group. Israel's one of them, but not the only one of them. There's a wide range of views, even within the Jewish community, about Israel and its conduct. I don't think that's the kind of message that's going to have the political success that he hopes.
Kerry Washington speaking. If you're watching us on Bloomberg TV at the podium right now, as we sprinkle in a good dose of entertainment and culture in this presentation, there'll be much more about her biography as well. But to the extent that she'll get into policy or hard policy, kind of remains a question. And a lot of folks have tried to frame the issue of crime around the location of this convention. Do you think we'll hear her speak to it?
Well, I think, crime has been an issue in Chicago for sure. But actually, we haven't had much trouble this week. I think it's very interesting to see that only up to this morning, 72 people had been arrested, and that was it.
In terms of protests?
Yes, in terms of protests, but it's a very low number in terms of arrests.
But Donald Trump's going to compare Chicago tonight to Afghanistan. That's been his rap on the city.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. And I think Chicago has its problems that absolutely have to be solved. But I think the convention itself went very smoothly. And I think people can't really deny that. 72 people arrested for the week is actually not that many.
I have to note on the stage, it does appear that Fitz has entered the stage here. If anyone is familiar with the show Scandal, obviously we have Olivia Pope and President Fitzgerald on the stage. Or Tony Goldwyn is actually the actor's name, but he just joined her on the stage. It certainly is active here in Chicago. In addition, though, to the more cultural figures that we are seeing that Joe is alluding to, we also have seen on the stage tonight a number of current members of Congress or the Senate or those who are running for seats. Bob Casey spoke this evening. Colin Allred, who was trying to unseat Ted Cruz, spoke this evening. As much as this is about Kamala Harris and her presidential ambitions and Democrats wanting to take the White House, tonight is also about them wanting to hold the Senate and flip the House, right?
That's right, absolutely. And they were winning a lot of these Senate races already, but there's signs that their polling lead has expanded as Harris has become the nominee. And there's this surge of energy that Democrats really hope will cascade down ticket. And instead of having to kind of distance themselves from their presidential candidate as they had been doing, instead of having to overcome a potential deficit at the top of the ticket, they're looking at the top of the ticket, giving them even more momentum. And as you say, all these candidates who are in tough races are appearing here tonight. They're clearly not afraid to be associated with Kamala Harris, with, we should note, two very important exceptions.
Well, I was going to
John
ask you
Tester of
about
Montana,
that.
Sherrod Brown of Ohio.
Sherrod Brown's the poster child for the boycott, I guess, of the convention. Are there many more where he came from?
I mean, him and Tester are the two biggest ones. A number of the House members, Jared Golden in Maine, who has a really tough House district, also not coming down here, a Trump-leaning House district. Tester, I believe I saw reporting today, said that he actually won't even endorse in the presidential race.
How about that?
So, when you're coming from these red states,
go near it.
Whatever momentum Democrats are generating isn't necessarily positive for them.
All right, Jonathan Tamari of Bloomberg Government and Bloomberg Chicago Bureau Chief Isis Almeida. It's been a very busy week for both of them. Thank you both so much for joining us on this final night of the Democratic Convention. And we'll continue our special coverage of the DNC live here in Chicago next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is special coverage of the Democratic National Convention on Bloomberg TV and radio, with live images on Bloomberg TV of the convention hall where it's all about to go down for Kamala Harris, the headliner, of course, on this final night of the DNC. She's slated to speak a little more than a half hour from now, and we'll bring you that address live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. A lot more in between the speeches tonight. We're hearing from a lot of governors tonight, a lot of entertainers. Kaylee, some questions about who the real entertainer headliner might be. Whether it be Beyonce, we'll let you know as we learn more. But there are reports that could happen later. This has been largely a celebration for Democrats in a way that contrasts a bit with what we saw in Milwaukee at the RNC.
Although in the RNC during that time, it was a very different race. The Republicans there still thought that they were running against Joe Biden. And Harris was on that ticket as well, obviously. But now she has stepped up from number 2 to number 1. as she accepts not the vice presidential, but the presidential nomination tonight.
Well, that's true. And someone who was an advisor to Joe Biden and has watched this race evolve along with us here on Bloomberg is Adam Hodge of Pulpit International, Democratic strategist with us from the United Center. It's great to see you, Adam. Congratulations on the fourth night of this convention, going pretty well in terms of this transition, because we started this week with your former boss on Monday, delivering a heartfelt address, one that was said to be bittersweet for him. And the Democratic Party seems to have rounded the bend on this fairly well. Does Kamala Harris need to salute Joe Biden tonight, even as she introduces herself?
The number one task for the vice president, this will be the biggest audience that she will have had and she will have probably between now and Election Day. And so she's got to reintroduce herself to the American public. In addition to that, she, of course, will salute Joe Biden. She has been the partner, the reason why she is in a position to become the Democratic nominee is because Joe Biden and her have run a really remarkable first 4 years of the term, and he has passed the torch to her. And so she will give him a little bit of that love. And then get into her story. She'll reintroduce herself, tell where she came from, and then also lay out what her vision is, vision for the future. That is a key thing for her to do. But there's no question the energy and enthusiasm in the arena is just outstanding. I mean, they've run out of water bottles inside the arena. That's how many people are packed in there. And the DNC and the party have a real infrastructure in place to go from this remarkable convention into the field and get people out to vote. And so, you know, I give the DNC and the party a lot of credit, Jamie Harrison in particular, for building the infrastructure to then go and run an effective campaign to turn this enthusiasm into real votes.
Well, Adam, I love how you are being not just a political strategist and analyst for us tonight, but a literal reporter from what it's like inside the United Center. I imagine you're going to have to fight your way back in there once we finish this interview. So thank you for making the time for us. As you allude to this notion of what happens after this week in Chicago, when all of the money that has been raised, all of the energy that has been harnessed goes out into the rest of the world for the next 75 days. Where should the Harris-Walz campaign be spending their time most effectively? Should we be seeing this ticket together? Should they be split up? What's the proper strategy here?
I think there's going to be a little of column A and a little bit of column B. You're going to see them campaign together, but they'll also get a chance to go out around the country. And I think one of the things coming out of this convention, you have an incredible speech from Barack Obama and Michelle Obama on Tuesday night. You can have imagine a day over the course of the next 75 days where you got Kamala Harris in one state, Tim Walz in another state, Barack Obama in a third state, Michelle Obama in a fourth state, and just for fun, Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, and a great bench in a handful of other states. I mean, that's a pretty remarkable, a bit of armor in the cannon. And that's what the Democrats have to harness that go around the country. But again, you know, the team has just built a remarkable operation. I heard today they've raised $500 million in the last month, which is just an astounding amount of money. They've got over 300 offices in a bunch of the battleground states. They got 1,600 volunteers ready to go. And so it's about taking the energy and enthusiasm from here in the arena and turning that into real votes. And you know, the polls have certainly been encouraging, but as we all know, polls don't vote. The people do. And so that's the task for the vice president and Tim Walz, is to capitalize on this energy and enthusiasm over the next 75 days.
We're watching images on Bloomberg TV of D.L. Hewley on the stage right now, getting some people up on their feet as he speaks to delegates inside the convention hall in Chicago. Adam, there have been a lot of celebrities around the place. I don't know how many you're rubbing elbows with this evening, but it seems to be almost an equal number of entertainers as celebrities. And maybe that was the design. This appears to be playing pretty well at home from what we understand in terms of ratings. But do Democrats run the risk of appearing to be less serious in the party of Hollywood?
I think actually if you take the totality of the speakers on the convention stage, there's actually been a real tremendous display of real people telling their story. I mean, last night, nothing could top Tim Walz's former players speaking to his character and his values and his leadership on the stage. Those are real people. Those aren't celebrities. You've got on Monday night, you had the incredibly powerful visual of all the people, both husband and wives, people who were talking about the fight for reproductive freedom in really deep personal terms. That is nothing that a celebrity can do. And then it doesn't help to have Oprah in your back pocket, right? And so we'll see what other major celebrities show up on the stage tonight. We're all very excited about it. But that is, again, what the party has to do is come roaring out of this convention with a real embrace of the campaign and to put in the hard work to turn this enthusiasm into votes.
All right, Adam Hodge, Bully Pulpit International and Democratic strategist, thank you so much for joining us outside the United Center. Good luck getting back in there. Coming up, we'll still continue our special coverage of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago on night 4 as we await the speech of Kamala Harris. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Can you tell us your names?
Hello, everybody. My name's Amara. And my name is Leela, her little sister.
And what are you here to do?
To teach you how to say your auntie's name.
Okay. So how do you pronounce it?
First, you say comma like a comma in a sentence. Then you say la like la 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 la.
Put it together, and it's 1, 2, 3, Kamala. All right, so let's practice. Let's practice.
Everybody over here, say comma. Everybody over here, say la.
Together. For president.
Kerry Washington with the grandnieces of Kamala Harris just now on the stage at the United Center here in Chicago, where we are broadcasting to you live with special coverage of the Democratic National Convention here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew this evening, and back with us now, our political panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, and Jeanne Zaino, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Okay, so usually you wouldn't have to be explaining how to pronounce the person's name who's about to accept a major party's nomination for president. Donald Trump has taken to calling Kamala very different versions, Kamala, Kamabla, at one point. Perhaps this is Democrats trying to draw attention to that. But Rick, you've been a little bit critical of this convention in that you think they've been veiling their hitting back at Donald Trump a bit too much. Is that another example of that, or is that effective?
That is trolling Trump. So I've got a new name for it. No more veiling. We're just going to call it what it's been. For 4 days, we've seen this convention in a very sophisticated way. I'll give them a lot of credit for that. Trolling Trump. This is using children to troll Trump. I mean, it's schooling the dude in Mar-a-Lago on how to say the name of the candidate for president. Yeah. And it's not going to change his behavior, but it does bring a little bit of headspace into Trump. You know, he's sitting there watching this.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it's a good way to get in his head, probably. But this is going to be the greatest troll convention of all time.
Does she speak to him directly tonight? I know you're watching, Donald.
I think she will take him on, and we do know he's watching because he is truthing at this very moment. Okay. So not only is he sitting, but he is truthing. And I have seen some, speaking of names, going back to unfortunate names, say for Senator Elizabeth Warren, who spoke tonight, talking about the issue of immigration or illegal immigration and crime when Kamala Harris was a state attorney general in California. So he is ready to go in terms of responding. Of course, I'm not sure that's what his campaign would want him to be doing, but it is what he wants to be doing. And then he's also talking about what he was doing today, which was talking about the border.
Yeah, he was in Arizona counter-programming this convention. The border and the economy, those are where most of the attack lines against Harris are centered. Does that mean they're the ones she has to talk about the most tonight, or are these the issues that she should try to avoid?
Yeah, it's a good question, because does she want to talk to the swing voters in the 7 key states or everybody else? Because the swing voters in the 7 key states have been examined over and over and over again since 2020. And their number one issue is the economy, especially cost of living affected by her administration, to the border. And so there've been a range of issues discussed at this convention, but barely anything on these 2 issues. And so if she wants to have a conversation with the most important voters in this election, the ones that will have to pick whether to vote for her or Donald Trump, she's going to have to address those 2 issues.
Rick, we've got less than a minute here. Anne-Marie Hordern is telling us that they've completely locked down the floor now. That gives us a sense that we're getting close to go time, right?
Yeah, I mean, security matters, but this is like to keep people from filing in and out. You have an entire floor organization, hundreds of people with baseball caps, you know, sort of instructing the audience on which chants to go after, you know, when to stand up, when to sit down. And so this is go time. This is like the most critical point in this entire week. And so from now until the end of this convention, you know, when they gavel it out, it's go time.
Well, that's right, and that's all going to happen before our eyes over the course of the next couple of hours here. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us for the ride. Special coverage from Chicago, the Democratic National Convention. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons on Bloomberg. Special coverage of the Democratic National Convention live from Chicago on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. We thank you for joining us as we bring you back to the floor of the United Center in this 4th night of the Democratic Convention. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern is standing by with one of the closest allies to Joe Biden and this White House. Anne-Marie?
Absolutely, a very close ally to Joe Biden and also to the Vice President Kamala Harris. Joined now by Senator Chris Coons. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Great to be with you.
You know, what do you want to hear from Kamala Harris tonight? This is a really important moment for her, and it was supposed to be one of your best friends speaking tonight, Joe Biden.
I'm looking forward to the American people getting a chance to better understand. And forgive me, I've been shouting a lot because I'm so excited.
We all have.
It's been quite a week.
Well, me for shouting over all of you excitement.
As an attorney general and a prosecutor, as a senator, as a vice president, she has an incredible record of accomplishment. She has the skills, the clarity, and the leadership to step into the role of president on day one. I also want folks to get a sense of why we're so excited here, what it is about her historic nomination, and the hope that she brings to people that gets them so excited. Because there's folks in middle America, there's folks all over our country who maybe aren't quite as clear about how sharp the contrast is between Donald Trump, who just 2 weeks ago was proposing a 20% tax, a surcharge, a tariff on every single imported good, and Kamala Harris, who just 2 weeks ago was talking about how to reduce housing prices, how to reduce grocery prices, and announcing cuts to prescription drug prices. It's a really stark contrast economically, in terms of security, in terms of their core values, and in terms of how they see our country and our future.
Do you think we're going to get more in terms of the policy? Because it's been a lot of what people are saying, vibes and personality. And I've talked to pollsters who say after Labor Day, the voters are going to be hungry for really to understand like what these policy proposals actually mean.
Yes. Look, you could not be clearer than the specifics on prescription drug reductions that were just announced last week. Vice President Harris was the deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act. Xarelto, Jardiance, Eliquis. Your viewers are probably familiar with these drugs. They cost $500, $600 a month. Now they're going to cost below $200 a month. It's a more than 50% price cut. It's going to save billions for taxpayers and more than $1 billion in out-of-pocket costs to seniors. That is a specific and concrete action. She's also got a robust menu of proposals for how to reduce housing prices. There are policy proposals she's putting out. In contrast, Donald Trump has spent a lot of time at rallies recently talking about Hannibal Lecter, and whether he'd rather be electrocuted or die by a shark, and how wind farms cause bird cemeteries. I mean, it's hard to say that Donald Trump has serious policy proposals.
You can hear how excited this room
Yes.
is. Do you think her at the top of the ticket is now going to impact your colleagues in the House and the Senate?
Yes, positively. Polling shows that. And the number of folks who are showing up at our grassroots campaign offices. We've discovered in district after district, state after state, where I've been campaigning, where weeks or months ago we had a solid number of volunteers. We have 10 times that number of volunteers. We have people showing up saying, I've never volunteered on a campaign before, but I'm so excited by this. We have a record number of small dollar donors, and we have a record number of people watching this convention.
And just finally, your name is floated out there a lot for maybe joining her team. You clearly are very close to her and current President Joe Biden. Do you see yourself as a Secretary of State?
I think we should win this election first and then worry about who's going to play what role in the next administration. I hope to contribute to making our foreign policy stronger and safer, more focused on our middle class, regardless of what role I'll have. I am expecting I'll be in the Senate, but one never knows.
Senator Chris Coons, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining Bloomberg. Of course, that was Senator Chris Coons, a name that has been floated to take the top position at the State Department. He's very close to foreign affairs, a close ally of President Biden, a friend of his, as well as Kamala Harris.
All right, Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern on the floor of the United Center right now. And right now on the stage is former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who's been escorted by her husband, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. He is not speaking, but she is. Let's listen in now.
She will defend our freedom. She saved lives. Join me in voting for Kamala Harris. Bravo! Thank
Brief remarks from former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords as her husband, Senator Mark Kelly, escorts her off the stage. Of course, he was at one time said to be on the short list for a running mate selection here for Kamala Harris. But of course, a poignant moment here to be with his wife, focusing on gun violence. Kaylee, at this portion, we've had a couple of speakers talking about this issue over the past 10 or 15 minutes, which is something the Democrats are trying to seize on, remembering, of course, that she was the victim of gun violence years ago.
Yeah, and before she came to the stage, there were other survivors of mass shootings, including at a school in Uvalde, Texas. Someone from that school, as well as Newtown, were on the stage just before her. And we just saw a sign going up. Our audience on Bloomberg TV saw it. Freedom from gun violence is another theme of this convention. They've been talking about freedom in different ways, be it reproductive rights or otherwise, but gun violence also a through line in this convention.
We'll have a lot more from the convention as we bring you a front row seat here to our global television and radio audience on Bloomberg. The Democratic National Convention, its final night in Chicago, live on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Children, they need to be loved. We were willing, we came when you called.
A live performance by Pink, What About Us, is what delegates are listening to right now at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Thanks for being part of our special coverage on Bloomberg TV and radio as we bring you the sights and sounds from this final night of the convention. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons with, of course, the big event tonight, Kamala Harris accepting her party's nomination, which is slated for Kaylee roughly 10 to 15 minutes from now. We'll see how close things go to on time tonight, but we'll bring you that address live here on Bloomberg.
Indeed, and as we await her remarks, we're joined now again by our signature political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, and Jeanne Zaino, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, are still with us. So obviously we have talked about this moment for Harris, how she will have an audience potentially of tens of millions at home. If she does indeed land this speech in prime time, perhaps you're reaching the maximum number of people possible. We saw Donald Trump in Milwaukee go on for a really long time. It was an hour and a half. We all sat through it. Tim Walz last night spoke for roughly 15 minutes. Where within that do you think Kamala Harris is going to fall tonight,
Office
Jeanne?
pool.
Yeah, I think we will be close to about 35, 40 minutes. Can I stretch it to that? Tim Walz was incredibly disciplined last night, to his credit. I think she will be disciplined, but come with a much longer speech because she has a lot more ground to cover. And, you know, we've been hearing a lot, for instance, from Donald Trump about immigration. She's going to address that. She is going to say, you know, you are hitting us on immigration. You are the one who decided not to have Republicans vote for that bill. Let's vote for that bill. Let's put it on the floor. So she is going to be talking about issues, but most importantly, she's going to be introducing herself to the American public and telling her story, which a lot of people don't know yet.
Seeing reports now that Kamala Harris's motorcade has started rolling toward the United Center, so good luck getting around Chicago. As we already noted, the floor has been shut down. And Rick, we're going to be hearing from Senator Mark Kelly, who was on the stage with his wife, Gabby Giffords, a couple of moments ago, in a couple of moments from now, representing the veteran community, really for the first time since, I guess, other than Tim Walz spoke to us last evening, of course, a former fighter pilot and a NASA astronaut. What is his place in this party, and what message does he uphold tonight?
Well, first of all, it was great to see them both up on the podium. Yeah. That was really quite nice. And they are as close to political royalty as you can get in Arizona today. Of course, Mark Kelly winning the John McCain Senate seat, also held previously by Barry Goldwater. He is the first Democrat in history in Arizona to represent that seat. And so he holds a special place. And I think that it's going to be a very important effort by this campaign to be able to reach out to veterans, because veterans in these communities that we're talking about in these targeted states do represent a swing vote. They don't have a attitude about Republicans and Democrats that has any real validity. They vote on issues, you know, so it could be something like Social Security or taxes or trade. It's not a homogeneous community that only votes on veteran issues. And so he is an articulate politician and a veteran on top of that of, as you remarked, so many different things. So he has credibility in that community.
Yeah. Well, we've just seen him take the podium on the floor of the United Center. You're seeing those images live if you're watching with us on Bloomberg TV. And of course, as we consider this, it is worth noting he was on the VP shortlist, as were others from swing states. Gretchen Whitmer, who will speak in a bit. Roy Cooper, who also has yet to speak. We heard from Josh Shapiro last night. And I wonder the role you expect these individuals to play, Rick, after we leave the convention as we move forward through the campaign. Yes, it will be Harris and Walz out on the trail, but it's going to be these exact people too, right? Trying to bring their strength of messaging to their different states.
Yeah, we've heard this repeatedly from Democratic consultants we've had on the show today and throughout the week. Embarrassment of riches, repeated over and over and over again. These are all politicians who have outsized approval ratings in their home states. So Michigan and Minnesota and, you know, places like Pennsylvania can play an incredibly important role. And I think that one of the things that we've seen as a sort of minor theme of this convention is that we're all in this together, right? This is a convention that's completely unified. We said that in Milwaukee. Yeah. But you know what? Not one of these delegates on the floor of that convention pulled a lever for Kamala Harris, but she's the nominee tonight. And so it's phenomenal, right? Whoever thought something like this would happen? And there is no question that they are backing her 110%. So having that kind of support out there is going to be really critical to winning this campaign for them.
Picking up on your remarks about representing the veterans community, we're going to hear from Leon Panetta after we hear from Senator Kelly, of course, former Secretary of Defense, CIA Director. How much does the Democratic Party need to show its seriousness when it comes to national security tonight? We spent a lot of time talking about entertainers and whether Beyonce is going to show up, but this is the real business, the serious part of the program here.
Oh, they have to absolutely prove to the American public the number one thing we expect of our government: keep us safe at home and abroad. And so, you know, they have to make that case. And we heard Tim Walz talking yesterday about Kamala Harris's strength. She is strong. She is prepared. She is experienced. She has been vice president. She has been in the room for 3 years. And they are going to continue to make this case, not just tonight, but going forward. Because if you cannot show that your candidate has the strength to go face to face with some of the worst actors in the world and defend our interests, then people will simply not feel safe voting for them. So critically important. And of course, Leon Panetta is one of many people who will make this case about strength an added, of course, issue, because this is the first female to get the nomination. Well, not the first female, but the first Black and Asian American female to get the nomination. And so this makes it all that much tougher for a woman to make that case. But it's 2024, and so we hear strength over and over again in this convention.
Well, and as we consider foreign policy issues as well, of course, we've talked all week about the lack of the kind of protests over the war in Gaza and Israel's conduct being as robust as we may have seen. Yes, there have been a few dozen arrests. There have been protesters present, but it hasn't been super disruptive to this convention. That doesn't mean, though, that Kamala Harris can go without talking about it, right? Given the criticism this administration has come under when it comes to Israel, how should she be approaching that issue?
It's one of the most difficult issues for the administration. She's part of that administration. She is going to, at some point, have to differentiate herself from Joe Biden. And, you know, we've heard a lot this week about the fact you had a group who wanted a Palestinian speaker and did not get it. And they are very frustrated by that. So I think it's going to be something we hear about going forward. I'm not sure we'll hear a lot about it tonight, but certainly one of the most important issues worldwide that we are facing. And there are many others, as we know.
All right, Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, they're not going far. They'll be with us until Vice President Kamala Harris takes the stage this evening as we bring you special live coverage of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago, live on Bloomberg TV and radio. We'll be right back.
How are you feeling tonight?
I am feeling out of sight. This is an amazing. I have been to every convention since 1984. This has more excitement, more optimism, more unity, more exhilaration than I've ever seen, because it's a 1-2 punch. Get Kamala and Walz in, and they will really help working people and help America. But don't let Trump in, because we cannot have America destroyed.
In many ways, this is your convention, you and Nancy Pelosi, because behind the scenes, you helped President Biden make that decision.
Well, all I can tell you is Joe Biden made the right decision for the country. It's very hard when a man has such power that they step down. It's an act of strength. It's an act of courage, but also an act of kindness and humility.
What did you say to him that day in Delaware?
That's staying with him and me.
That's fair. I have a question for you, though. When are we going to hear more policies from Kamala Harris?
We're going to start. We've heard some good. No, the home buyer policy is great. She's got a whole bunch of good ones. Excuse me.
What about salt? One question on salt. What are you going to do with salt?
As long as I'm majority leader, it's not going to be extended.
Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern not letting Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer off that easy as she caught up with him earlier today, this evening on the convention floor here in Chicago, inside the United Center. Welcome back to special coverage of the Democratic National Convention on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lines alongside Joe Matthew as we await the big event, Kamala Harris speaking on this final night of the Democratic Convention.
Yeah, sounds like motorcades are going around us right now.
Yep,
and we do know
rolling.
that she's en route here to the United Center with a scheduled speech that was set for about 4 minutes ago, Kaylee, but they've hewed a lot more closely to the schedule this evening after many nights of going well beyond prime time in the U.S. If there's going to be an effort to attract a primetime audience on the East Coast, they better get going soon.
Indeed. And back with us now as we get going here and stay going, that is. Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, our signature political panel. Jeanne, just to come back to this notion that Anne Marie was asking Chuck Schumer about. He didn't want to talk about the conversation he had with Joe Biden in Delaware, but in some ways that is the elephant still in the room in the convention hall. Joe Biden gave his speech on Monday night, but the fact of the matter is that Harris is about to accept this nomination does speak to a Democratic Party that turned against its own, an incumbent president of the United States, and almost just as quickly coalesced around something new. How should we be thinking about this transformation and evolution in the Democratic Party that happened so quickly? What this night really represents in that regard?
Yeah, really in about 32, 33 days it happened. And one of the stunning things is the lack of focus since Monday night on the sitting president, Joe Biden. We did hear something from Bill Clinton about Joe Biden, but many, many folks who have gotten up there and spoke have not addressed or talked about Joe Biden. We do understand, by the way, that Senator Kelly just did mention Joe Biden, so he is one of those exceptions. But this is the reality of where the Democratic Party is. They have made a decision to be forward-looking, to turn the page, if you will. We're seeing all this young bench of Democrats who are talking tonight and have been talking in that effort to show voters and to give voters what they've been asking for, which is to look for something new. But you do have a sitting president, and a sitting president tied to the nominee who's going to be taking accepting the nomination tonight. It is something we have never seen in American history. And the fact she's going to be doing this after just 32 days without a primary, and to Rick's point earlier, with not one vote by any of those delegates in the room, is quite unprecedented.
Well, we're still a few speakers away from getting to the Vice President, Leon Panetta, speaking right now. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you see images of the former Secretary of Defense and CIA Director addressing the delegates right now. And we spent a lot of time at this table today and over the course of this week asking people what the message should be, how Kamala Harris should use her time. But take us behind the scenes right now, Rick, because they're holed up somewhere, I suspect, in a room in that convention center, making the final touches here. What's happening with the candidate?
Yeah, in real time, they probably just hit the doors. They have a secret area to go into, right into the convention hall. They go up an elevator, probably through a kitchen. You know, these are the kitchen. You know, the Secret Service loves going through kitchens. I don't ever understand it.
Goodfellas style.
And yeah, very Goodfellas stuff. And they'll get her into her green room, and she'll be surrounded by the most intimate staff. Right, you don't want any distractions. And you know, they'll go through this cadence where you know, the people who will then leave that room and go to the presidential box on the floor of the convention, family members, people like that, and she'll be going through with her staff a couple more pointers. Just remember what we talked about earlier today. She'll maybe do a run through of the speech on the teleprompter. Just depends upon how confident she feels, you know, when she's there. Make sure that everything is put together, makeup is set, hair's good. She'll get wired up for sound. And then she'll start a process. There'll be a number of chambers she goes through before she puts her foot on that stage, and everything has to be choreographed on the stage before she'll do that.
Sounds
so
nerve-wracking.
There's a lot of effort, and to be honest with you, there are probably 100 people in process of meeting that car at the basement and bringing her up onto the stage, all handing off to different things in that process. So it's a very complex effort to get her where she's going to be seen by the public tonight.
Wow.
So clearly it's high stakes for Kamala Harris. I think we know that. High pressure, certainly. But given, and even Rick, a Republican, has described it this way, a nearly flawless launch of candidacy thus far. Is she going to look back after tonight and realize all of the easiest parts are already behind her, and it only gets harder from here, Jeanne?
Yeah, and I think she knows that. She's the first one to say in this last 32 days that we are in the fight of our lives and we are the underdogs. And that's what she has told her team and her supporters repeatedly. We've heard that also from people speaking, Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, who have said over and over again the whole notion of Goldilocks. Yeah. You expect these people to have been, you know, hit, if you will, by opposition research, and don't abandon them when you hear something that you don't love. So she knows that, and she's going to have to be aware that this is what's coming down the pike.
We take another live view of the podium here thanks to our panel, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino. They'll be back with us as we anticipate the vice president's speech here. Ruben Gallego making remarks to the delegates right now in the room. Thousands of them have gathered here in Chicago for this very moment as we count down to the big speech, the grand finale of night 4 of the Democratic National Convention. A lot more of our special coverage ahead. Stay right where you are. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew on Bloomberg TV and Radio. For Bloomberg's global TV and radio audience, welcome back to special coverage of the Democratic National Convention. We're live from Chicago on night 4 alongside Kaylee Lyons. I'm Joe Matthew as we count down to the speech from Kamala Harris, the vice president, if things remain on schedule. From here, at least, Kaylee will be speaking within the half hour as we look at a collection of veterans, lawmakers, and other officials who've served in the military following an address from Ruben Gallego, Leon Panetta, and of course, Senator Mark Kelly that we were watching with you a bit earlier. We're going to keep tabs on what's happening on the stage and also bring you to the floor, to the convention floor with Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern, who has been ensconced with the New York delegation this evening. Anne-Marie, who are you with?
Yeah, feeling at home with the New York delegation, clearly. I'm with Governor Kathy Hochul here. She's very excited because her friend, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, is taking the stage right now. The crowd is absolutely electric to hear from Governor Whitmer. Governor Kathy Hochul, thank you so much for joining me. What do you want to hear from Kamala Harris tonight?
Her vision for the future, but also how she's fighting for the common man. The women of this country, the men of this country, Democrats, Republican, Independents. She is a broad-based coalition builder. And I'll tell you this, the energy here is going to be transported all across this nation. That's how we're going to win. I'm so excited to be here with my New York delegation. They're the best, and we're going to send her off with a great burst of energy and take it to the polls.
75 days. Do you think this election could just be run, though, off this momentum of what people are calling a vibe shift and personality and not getting into the nitty-gritty details of policy?
Let's not hold her to a different standard than you do Donald Trump. Are you criticizing him for not having intense policy platforms put out by now? This is a pep rally.
Well, he's an incumbent.
This sends her off. This sends her off to go out there and talk about her agenda. This is the next step. It's over tonight. Tomorrow we get out there and tell the story, the policies, and the people we're fighting for. Don't worry about that. It's coming. Thank you.
So, can I just one more question?
I want to hear her.
Well, just quickly, Speaker Pelosi this week was basically saying that New York lost these seats because of the gubernatorial race. Do you think with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket?
That's not an accurate portrayal of what happened. So we'll talk later.
Do you think they'll flip to Democrat?
I'm listening to my friend. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Governor Kathy Hochul there. So earlier at the DNC, Speaker Pelosi said those 5 New York districts flipped to red because of what was going on at the gubernatorial race, something Governor Hochul didn't want to discuss, but it is fair. Her friend, Governor Whitmer, is speaking right now, and the crowd is very excited to hear from the governor of Michigan.
All right, well, let's hear from her ourselves. Anne-Marie Hordern on the floor, thank you so much. We'll listen in now here on Bloomberg TV and Radio to Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
Checking out. Hell, you think he's ever been to a grocery store? That's what the chauffeur is for. But Kamala Harris, she gets us. She sees us. She is us. Look, we've all lived through a lot of history over the past few years. Floods and fires, an attempted coup, a plot, and a pandemic. It's exhausting. We don't know what the next 4 years will bring. But what we do know is this. Through it all, your life won't stop. You're going to have to get to work, pick up the kids, and pay your bills. And then one day, when you're just trying to get everyone out the door, a news alert goes off. Something happened. Something hit the fan. you'll ask, is my family going to be okay? And then you'll ask, who the hell is in charge? What if it's him? What if it's that man from Mar-a-Lago? I know, in a crisis, we need someone strong enough to come up with a plan, to tell the truth, and to bring people together. Right now, before the crisis, is when we get to choose. Why wouldn't we choose the leader who's tough, tested, and a total badass? I know who I want as our commander-in-chief. America, let's choose Kamala Harris.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer speaking live on the stage at the Democratic National Convention in a primetime address. Not a mistake, Kaylee Lines, that she would speak on this night ahead of Kamala Harris and at this time. She was said to be at one point considered as a running mate, but clearly looked at as not just a rising star, but someone with presidential promise in the Democratic Party.
Yeah. And speaking of stars, Eva Longoria taking the stage now. I do want to note, though, as we just saw Governor Whitmer, she was wearing white, as was Governor Kathy Hochul, who Anne-Marie Hordern was just speaking with. There are many women in that convention hall of the thousands gathered wearing white this evening, an ode to the suffragettes, as this convention has in part been messaging about women's rights and reproductive rights as we mark this history-making moment in which, sure, the second woman is accepting a major party's nomination for president, but this one is a woman of color, and that makes history fresh tonight.
Well, that's for sure. This is something we've never seen before, as a woman of color accepts a major political party's nomination for president. We're going to witness that together coming up later this hour. In fact, if things stay on schedule, within the next 15 to 20 minutes, we expect Kamala Harris to take the stage. She's made her way into the United Center, Kaylee, and it's just a matter of time now with a couple of speakers ahead and the warm-up by Governor Roy Cooper. Some questions about entertainment, potentially, and some major headliners. We'll just keep the names to ourselves from now, but whatever happens on the stage, we'll let you know here on Bloomberg TV and radio as we continue our special coverage ahead of the DNC live from Chicago on Bloomberg TV and radio.
On the Senate Intelligence Committee, she investigated Russian interference in our election. She defends free and fair elections everywhere. You already know how Trump feels about those. Donald Trump skipped his intelligence briefings. He was too busy sucking up to dictators and dreaming of becoming one himself.
The role of our military is to defend us from foreign enemies. It is not to threaten Americans, and it sure as hell isn't to put immigrants in camps.
Leon Panetta, the former Secretary of Defense, CIA Director, and Senator Mark Kelly speaking earlier at the convention. In fact, just moments ago, with a turn toward veterans that much of the program was dedicated to this evening, part of our special coverage of the Democratic National Convention on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines here in Chicago. Kaylee, we're working our way through the schedule here this evening with only a couple of speakers left before we hear from Kamala Harris. That could be, gosh, within the next 10 or 15 minutes. We'll bring that speech to you live here on Bloomberg.
Yeah, of course, it's former Congressman Adam Kinzinger who is addressing the convention now, speaking to a room of Democrats as someone who sat in the House of Representatives as a Republican. Of course, became a face well known across the country as he was one of the ones leading the committee looking into the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6, 2021.
That's right, a former Republican, or I guess, is he a card-carrying Republican anymore? I don't remember. Donald Trump calls him a rhino, but it's in fact not one of not the only, I should say, Republican or former Republican speaking on this stage as we assemble our reporter panel. Bloomberg's Angela Greiling-Keane and Gregory Cordy are with us here at the table here as we wait to hear the big speech. Great to see both of you, and welcome back. Gregory, this is an interesting moment here in the program as people are winding up for what feels like a big concert and rally, but some serious tone on national security there from those individuals.
Yeah, and that has to have been the balance for this whole convention, is to intersperse the politicians with the more lighthearted entertainment fare, the serious policy with some hopes and dreams and aspirational themes, but also, you know, being sure also to attack President Trump. So there's a lot of things that this convention is trying to accomplish. And it's a matter of just sort of show business pacing here to make sure that they get all those themes in, to kind of have a rhythm and a crescendo to it. Yep. And right now we're it's maybe a little bit of a quiet part here as we build up to the crescendo of the closing, the capstone of this whole convention, which is Kamala Harris's acceptance formally of the nomination for president.
Well, as we understand the words that Adam Kinzinger is speaking on the stage right now, he's talking about Democrats being as patriotic as us, I imagine referring to Republicans, saying the Republican Party is no longer conservative, which speaks to this notion, Angela, that the Democrats here are trying to draw in, say, those Nikki Haley voters or the people who were double haters or undecided when it was still a Biden-Trump race. How do we expect Kamala Harris is going to speak to those specific individuals, the R's, the I's, the U's, if we can call them that?
Well, what she needs to do tonight is define herself to people who don't know her. And that's a lot of the country, including, of course, those independent voters, the ones who maybe haven't decided how they're going to vote in November. She's been the vice president, of course, for nearly 4 years, a U.S. senator before that, but she's not as well known of a name. So what we're going to hear tonight, most likely, is she'll talk about her time working at McDonald's. That is, of course, something we've heard a lot about in the last couple of days from her surrogates, but it's a way that she will define herself to the people that don't know her, to establish her credibility, not just as a San Francisco liberal, but as a person who can relate to the middle class. There'll be a lot more biographical points, I'm sure, beyond that, but that's what she's going to do tonight to try to reach that audience.
Where's the balance on biography versus policy? There's a risk of going too far on both.
I think tonight is biography.
Yeah.
We've heard her surrogates, including some tonight, as well as in the days leading up to this apex of the convention, talking about policy. Many of the speakers have been chosen because they can address one particular policy issue, but this is not a night for Kamala Harris to bring in policy. She'll do that later, maybe even starting tomorrow, but tonight is about herself, becoming approachable, authoritative, somebody who voters are excited to choose on the ballot.
Well, and of course, it matters very much where those voters are deciding to choose her, specifically in the swing states that are ultimately going to decide the Electoral College. And I wonder if we should be reading into the sequencing here this evening. We heard from Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer just moments ago. The last governor to speak before Kamala Harris is Roy Cooper of North Carolina. Yes, someone who was on the VP shortlist, but also representing a state which polling just in the last few days has suggested is potentially winnable for Harris, when that wasn't necessarily looking like it could easily be the case for Joe Biden. So walk us through where the map actually stands as Kamala Harris gets ready to walk to the podium.
Yeah, and we also heard from Josh Shapiro this week. If you're a statewide elected Democrat in a swing state, the odds are you were speaking at this convention. We talked at Bloomberg, we talked to Dan Kinkinnon, who is the swing states or the Battleground states director for the Harris campaign now. And what he sees is an expanded map. A lot of people were kind of looking at a narrow path to victory for Joe Biden in those blue wall northern industrial states. We're talking about Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And just the way the math worked out, if Biden won those states and found one more electoral vote somewhere else, that got him a victory. What Harris is doing is expanding the map to those Sunbelt states, North Carolina, which you talked about, but also Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. She's doing so well there, in fact, that the Trump campaign and the super PAC supporting him is now being forced to spend millions of dollars in a lot of those states to defend them. So all of a sudden now we have a race. Look, as much as we talk about the momentum, this is still a dogfight.
Yeah.
And nothing is guaranteed for either side here. But what we have is a lot more dynamic map and a lot more dynamic campaign than we had even just a month ago.
I think we all remember what a debate can do to a presidential campaign. We've got another one coming up pretty soon here. But so speak more to that strategy. Is it about luring or baiting the other campaign to spend money where they don't need to, or expanding your own map?
Yeah, that's part of the gamesmanship that happens here. And 4 years ago, we saw Biden spend money in Florida to try to get Trump to defend it. That Trump retaliated by spending some money in Minnesota to try to get Democrats to defend that. There is a little bit of that game, and there will be some feints to states that we don't think are in play.
Yep.
Trump has talked a big game about Virginia, Minnesota, maybe New Hampshire. Whereas for Democrats, yeah, they might want to expand into a state like Florida. This map that we've been talking about has been pretty static with those 7 states for so long because Trump fundamentally changed the map in 2016. That's the map that we've been dealing with ever since. But this is a different lineup than that Trump-Biden rematch that we had been anticipating. And so that might change the calculus for both of these campaigns.
If you're joining us on Bloomberg TV, you see now Maya Harris, the sister of the Vice President Kamala Harris, now taking the podium. That does mean we are getting closer on the schedule. It's just Maya Harris and Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, who we were just speaking about, set to speak before the vice president. So it does suggest we are in the final stretch here at what is 10:16 Eastern time. This Harris speech, Joe, could very well make it into prime time.
Well, that's right. It would be the first time I think that would happen this week. It was a big goal of the campaign. Maya Harris might have some interesting advice for her sister. She was a senior policy advisor on Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016 and actually knows what it's like to strategize against a Trump campaign. He's watching tonight. We were asking earlier if Kamala Harris should speak directly to Donald Trump from the podium.
Well, she's not going to get Donald Trump's vote, so I don't think that's her primary audience. I'm sure we'll hear her talk about Trump. We'll definitely hear the words Project 2025.
That's true.
That is a Democratic talking point because it's resonated so well in the polls for Democrats that an increasing number of their voters dislike Project 2025. It's really become a red meat phrase for that party.
That's for sure.
But I think we will hear more of a positive speech than a speech that's negative in tone. That obviously is one of the things that Kamala Harris is doing to differentiate herself from Donald Trump, is just the tone of her speaking of the overall convention. So I expect that's what we'll hear more of tonight.
Joy, I think, is what you might be describing. It's something we've heard a lot about on that stage this week. Bloomberg's Gregory Cordy and Angela Greiling-King of Bloomberg Government, thank you both so much for joining us here in Chicago. We appreciate it, and we're not going anywhere. Stay tuned as we continue our special coverage of the Democratic National Convention with just minutes to go until Kamala Harris's acceptance speech of the Democratic presidential nomination. Stay with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome back to special coverage of the Democratic National Convention live from Chicago on Bloomberg TV and radio. We are just moments away from the acceptance speech of Vice President Kamala Harris as she formally becomes the Democratic nominee for president, the first woman of color to do so. Right now, speaking on the stage in the United Center is her sister, Maya Harris. She, of course, is the second to last speaker scheduled to speak before the vice president. We are still awaiting remarks from the governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. Yeah, a pretty deliberate placement this evening when you consider the governor of North Carolina essentially introducing Kamala Harris. We heard as well from the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, and of course the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, had a pretty great placement last evening on night 3. This is the big one, though, night 4, the grand finale, and the crowd's certainly been acting like it. Anne-Marie Hordern is on the floor right now. We'll try to connect with her a little bit later as we bring in our signature panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, is back, and Jeanne, Zaino, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. They are Bloomberg politics contributors in our signature panel, the two people we want to hear as Governor Roy Cooper takes the stage right now. This thing is starting to move along pretty quickly here, Kaylee. Why don't we put an ear on the governor here, and we'll resolve with our panel here in Chicago. This is live on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The last guy standing between you and the moment we're all waiting for. So I'm going to get right to it. All week, you've heard stories about my friend Kamala. I want to take you behind the scenes of one of them. 2011 was a rough time for American homeowners. Hundreds of thousands were losing their homes to illegal foreclosure. I was Attorney General in North Carolina, while Kamala had just become California's. All the AGs were close to a settlement with the big banks, and it was a pretty good deal. Would have meant $4 billion for California families who'd been ripped off. I know that sounds like a lot, but Kamala said, hang on a minute. I've met these families. I know what they've been through, and they deserve more. She went toe-to-toe with some of the world's most powerful executives, and she refused to give in. Let me tell you, this was a huge risk, but she knew it was a risk worth taking. That's Kamala. And we all know what happened. The banks caved. That $4 billion for California families became $20 billion. That was the first time I witnessed Kamala in action. And what I saw was a leader who does exactly what she says she's going to do, who never will settle for less. America, we got a lot of big fights ahead of us, and we've got one hell of a fighter ready to take them on. I know that because I know her. And tonight, I want the American people to know, even if you don't agree with her on everything, Kamala Harris will fight for you to the very end. For families who need better health care or a safer place to live, Kamala will fight for you. For parents who want better schools for their kids, for workers worried about a secure retirement for themselves, Kamala will fight for you. For any one of our allies, anywhere in the world, wondering if America still has your back, remember this: Kamala will fight for you. And when she fights, we win. Kamala's ready. Kamala's ready. The question is, are we? Are we going to stand up and fight for Kamala like she'll stand up and fight for us? All right. If you're ready, my home state of North Carolina, stand up. Stand up, Pennsylvania. Stand up, Michigan. Stand up, Wisconsin. Stand up, Georgia. Stand up, Nevada. Stand up, Arizona. Stand up, America. Are we going to stand up? Are we going to fight? Are we going to vote? Are we going to win? You bet we are. Let's go get them.
North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper getting the crowd inside the United Center absolutely roaring, as in his words, we approach the moment we've all been waiting for, the acceptance speech of Vice President Kamala Harris, a video now rolling, running through a little bit of her biography.
Yeah.
And as that rolls, let's go to the floor and get a sense of the energy as that happens. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern is still there. And Anne-Marie, I'm sure everybody is at the edge of their seats, or at this point, frankly, just standing up.
No one's in their seats. No one can be at the edge of their seats because Roy Cooper, the governor of North Carolina, just told everyone to stand up. The room was absolutely electric. It feels like a pep rally that really kicked off yesterday with Coach Walz. The issue, of course, is, and I spoke to a lot of pollsters today about it, is that they have the ball, but, you know, they still need to go another yard line. They need to get it to the finish line. And we'll see tonight whether Kamala Harris can stick the landing, and then it's going to be a sprint for the Democratic Party. 75 days. We cannot say what this moment is. Just a month ago, it was supposed to be President Joe Biden about to take that stage. We should also note how interesting it is that they put Governor Cooper ahead of Kamala Harris. North Carolina, they feel, is in play. Center for Policy recently moved it from lean Republican to toss-up. This is a state that President Barack Obama only won once in 2008, and before that, a Democrat has not carried North Carolina since 1976. And the fact that also this week, trying to counter-program, we saw President Donald Trump there talking about national security, I think says a lot about this race and how tight it is going to be. Kaylee, Joe?
Anne-Marie Hordern on the floor. Keep your elbows high, Anne-Marie. It's pretty tight down there as we anticipate the speech from Kamala Harris. The floor, Kaylee, was shut down some time ago here in Chicago as the crowd gets pretty thick for this historic moment. Whether you are with Kamala Harris or not, a Democrat or a Republican, you can't deny the history of the moment here with a woman of color accepting a major political party's nomination here tonight in Chicago.
Absolutely. And we are marking this moment in history with our political panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, and Jeanne Zaino, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, are still with us as we are literally in the final minutes here leading up to Harris's speech. Jeanne, this is it. We've talked a lot about what she's actually going to say. Now we're actually going to hear her say it. My question is, does she have the power to change minds tonight?
I think she does. I mean, we can't forget, even though she's been vice president, a lot of Americans don't know her story, and she wants to use that story to make the case that she is going to be fighting for the middle class, for all of us, and contrast herself to Donald Trump. So I do think that she can change minds, but they are particularly focused, as we heard from the governor from North Carolina, on those swing states. And Anne-Marie was just saying North Carolina back in the swing state category. And he listed off the states. I didn't hear my own home state of New York. Why? Because it's not one of the important seven. So they are focused right on those 6 or 7 swing states. And he listed them out like they should, because they're going to try to change minds right there, because that's where it matters to get to 270.
As we wait for Kamala Harris, I'm just going to rip off the Band-Aid. There is a reporter from the Associated Press telling us Beyonce is not in the building. She never planned to be at the DNC and is not going to be delivering a concert this evening. Our political director, Jody Schneider, jokes maybe they're bringing James Taylor back in for his return performance. I don't think that's going to happen. But the fact of the matter is, Rick, that means it's just Kamala Harris tonight. There's no more window dressing, entertaining, no more Hollywood. It's just on her right now. So how does she do this?
Well, first, I sent over a resume. I can knock out a couple of Sinatra songs tonight if they're really desperate. But
we might need that right here.
Yeah. Be careful what you ask for. Yeah, look, this is obviously the most unexpected acceptance speech of a presidential nomination in modern political history. As Jeanne said, a month ago, this was not going to happen. And so I think that this is a curiosity for the country. They're just now catching up to the fact that, oh, Joe Biden's not giving a speech tonight. I mean, it's really an incredibly rapid change, and it takes voters a while to tune in. And so I think she's going to have a moment to define this on her own terms. And what I'm really impressed with is they've used prime time very effectively to moderate the Democratic Party. I mean, we've had 3 Republicans speak at prime time at a Democratic convention. That's extraordinary. And even just the veterans on stage sending those messages through tonight. And of course, the football team last night, who made just such a great appearance. You wouldn't have ever thought that something like that was going to be on the stage at a Democratic convention.
Well, and we are keeping an eye on the stage now here on Bloomberg TV, if you're with us there in Bloomberg Radio, as the Vice President, Kamala Harris, is now walking onto the stage at the United Center, getting ready to make history as she formally accepts the Democratic nomination for president, something she didn't think, as we have noted, she would be doing just 4.5 short weeks ago. She is getting ready as a woman of color to say, I accept your nomination to be president of the United States, Joe.
Yeah, Kaylee, here she is, the moment she's been waiting for, and I suspect this is going to take some time. Joe Biden got a 4-minute-long standing ovation on Monday night, and that was just the warm-up act. I think we can agree. It's a sea of signs, blue and white here in Chicago this evening, as Kamala Harris makes her way to the podium. I don't think they're going to let her talk anytime soon. We can put an ear on this if you want, but chance of Kamala from one side of the arena to the other. We're going to let this breathe, of course, bringing the entire address live and unfiltered here on Bloomberg as the Vice President of the United States gets her moment here in Chicago. Kaylee.
Yes, there's Kamala signs all over the floor of the convention hall in the United Center. Of course, the husband of the Vice President, Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman, is gathered there with her stepchildren in the front of the arena. She's pointing to the audience for those listening on Bloomberg Radio as she is still listening to the resounding applause. And it sounds like she's getting ready to get started. So let's watch her make history here. Joe, again, you are waiting the remarks.
They're not going to let her start this anytime soon.
She's trying her best.
She sure is.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all. Okay, we got to get to some business. We got to get to some business. Okay, thank you all. Okay. Thank you, 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 please, thank you, please, thank you so very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Okay, let's get to business. Let's get to business. All right. So let me start by thanking my most incredible husband, Doug, for being an incredible partner to me, an incredible father to Cole and Ella, and happy anniversary, Dougie. I love you so very much. To our President, Joe Biden. When I think about the path that we have traveled together, Joe, I am filled with gratitude. Your record is extraordinary, as history will show, and your character is inspiring. And Doug and I love you and Jill and are forever thankful to you both. And to Coach Tim Walz, you are going to be an incredible vice president. And to the delegates and everyone who has put your faith in our campaign, your support is humbling. So, America, the path that led me here in recent weeks was no doubt unexpected. But I'm no stranger to unlikely journeys. So, my mother, our mother, Kamala Harris, had one of her own. And I miss her every day, and especially right now. And I know she's looking down, smiling. I know that. So my mother was 19 when she crossed the world alone, traveling from India to California with an unshakable dream to be the scientist who would cure breast cancer. When she finished school, she was supposed to return home to a traditional arranged marriage. But as fate would have it, she met my father, Donald Harris, a student from Jamaica. They They fell in love and got married, and that act of self-determination made my sister Maya and me. Growing up, we moved a lot. I will always remember that big Mayflower truck packed with all our belongings, ready to go to Illinois, to Wisconsin, and wherever our parents' jobs took us. My early memories of our parents together are very joyful ones. A home filled with laughter and music, Aretha, Coltrane, and Miles. At the park, my mother would say, "Stay close." But my father would say, as he smiled, "Run, Kamala, run. Don't be afraid. Don't let anything stop you." From my earliest years, he taught me to be fearless. But the harmony between my parents did not last. When I was in elementary school, they split up. And it was mostly my mother who raised us. Before she could finally afford to buy a home, she rented a small apartment in the East Bay. In the Bay, you either live in the hills or the flatlands. We lived in the flats. A beautiful working-class neighborhood of firefighters, nurses, and construction workers, all who tended their lawns with pride. My mother, she worked long hours, and like many working parents, she leaned on a trusted circle to help raise us. Mrs. Shelton, who ran the daycare below us and became a second mother. Uncle Sherman, Aunt Mary, Uncle Freddie, Auntie Chris. None of them family by blood, and all of them family by love. Family who taught us how to make gumbo, how to play chess, and sometimes even let us win. Family who loved us, believed in us, and told us we could be anything and do anything. They instilled in us the values they personified: community, faith, and the importance of treating others as you would want to be treated, with kindness, respect, and compassion. My mother was a brilliant, 5-foot-tall, brown woman with an accent. And as the eldest child, I saw how the world would sometimes treat her. But my mother never lost her cool. She was tough, courageous, a trailblazer in the fight for women's health, and she taught Maya and me a lesson that Michelle mentioned the other night. She taught us to never complain about injustice, but do something about it. Do something about it. That was my mother. And she taught us, and she also taught us, and never do anything half-assed. And that is a direct quote. A direct quote. I grew up immersed in the ideals of the civil rights movement. My parents had met at a civil rights gathering, and they made sure that we learned about civil rights leaders, including the lawyers like Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley. Those who battled in the courtroom to make real the promise of America. So at a young age, I decided I wanted to do that work. I wanted to be a lawyer. And when it came time to choose the type of law I would pursue, I reflected on a pivotal moment in my life. You see, when I was in high school, I started to notice something about my best friend, Wanda. She was sad at school, and there were times she didn't want to go home. So one day I asked if everything was all right, and she confided in me that she was being sexually abused by her stepfather. And I immediately told her she had to come stay with us, and she did. This is one of the reasons I became a prosecutor, to protect people like Wanda, because I believe everyone has a right to safety, to dignity, and to justice. As a prosecutor, when I had a case, I charged it not in the name of the victim, but in the name of the people. For a simple reason. In our system of justice, a harm against any one of us is a harm against all of us. And I would often explain this to console survivors of crime, to remind them no one should be made to fight alone. We are all in this together. And every day in the courtroom, I stood proudly before a judge and I said 5 words: Kamala Harris for the people. And to be clear, my entire career, I've only had one client, the people. And so, on behalf of the people, on behalf of every American, regardless of party, race, gender, or the language your grandmother speaks, on behalf of my mother and everyone who has ever set out on their own unlikely journey, on behalf of Americans like the people I grew up with, people who work hard, chase their dreams, and look out for one another, on behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. And with this election, our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward. Not as members of any one party or faction, but as Americans. And let me say, I know there are people of various political views watching tonight, and I want you to know, I promise to be a president for all Americans. You can always trust me to put country above party and self, to hold sacred America's fundamental principles, from the rule of law to free and fair elections to the peaceful transfer of power. I will be a president who unites us around our highest aspirations, a president who leads and listens, who is realistic, practical, and has common sense, and always fights for the American people. From the courthouse to the White House, that has been my life's work. As a young courtroom prosecutor in Oakland, California, I stood up for women and children against predators who abuse them. As Attorney General of California, I took on the big banks, delivered $20 billion for middle-class families who faced foreclosure, and helped pass a homeowner Bill of Rights, one of the first of its kind in the nation. I stood up for veterans and students being scammed by big for-profit colleges, for workers who are being cheated out of their wages, the wages they were due, for seniors facing elder abuse. I fought against the cartels who traffic in guns and drugs and human beings, who threaten the security of our border and the safety of our communities. And I will tell you, these fights were not easy. And neither were the elections that put me in those offices. We were underestimated at practically every turn. But we never gave up, because the future is always worth fighting for. And that's the fight we are in right now, a fight for America's future. Fellow Americans, this election is not only the most important of our lives, it is one of the most important in the life of our nation. In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Consider not only the chaos and calamity when he was in office, but also the gravity of what has happened since he lost the last election. Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes. When he failed, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol, where they assaulted law enforcement officers. When politicians in his own party begged him to call off the mob and send help, he did the opposite. He fanned the flames. And now, for an entirely different set of crimes, he was found guilty of fraud by a jury of everyday Americans, and separately found liable for committing sexual abuse. And consider what he intends to do if we give him power again. Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol. His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy. His explicit intent to deploy our active duty military against our own citizens. Consider the power he will have, especially after the United States Supreme Court just ruled that he would be immune from criminal prosecution. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States, not to improve your life, not to strengthen our national security, but to serve the only client he has ever had, himself. And we know what a second Trump term would look like. It's all laid out in Project 2025, written by his closest advisors, and its sum total is to pull our country back to the past. But America, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back to when Donald Trump tried to cut Social Security and Medicare. We are not going back to when he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, when insurance companies could deny people with pre-existing conditions. We are not going to let him eliminate the Department of Education that funds our public schools. We are not going to let him end programs like Head Start that provide preschool and childcare for our children. America, we are not going back. And we are charting a new way forward. Forward to a future with a strong and growing middle class, because we know a strong middle class has always been critical to America's success. And building that middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency. And I'll tell you, this is personal for me. The middle class is where I come from. My mother kept a strict budget. We lived within our means, yet we wanted for little. And she expected us to make the most of the opportunities that were available to us and to be grateful for them. Because, as she taught us, opportunity is not available to everyone. That's why we will create what I call an opportunity economy where everyone has the chance to compete and a chance to succeed. Whether you live in a rural area, small town, or big city. And as president, I will bring together labor and workers and small business owners and entrepreneurs and American companies to create jobs, to grow our economy, and to lower the cost of everyday needs like health care and housing and groceries. We will provide access to capital for small business owners and entrepreneurs and founders. And we will end America's housing shortage and protect Social Security and Medicare. Now compare that to Donald Trump, because I think everyone here knows he doesn't actually fight for the middle class. He doesn't actually fight for the middle class. Instead, he fights for himself and his billionaire friends. And he will give them another round of tax breaks that will add up to $5 trillion to the national debt. And all the while, he intends to enact what in effect is a national sales tax, call it a Trump tax, that would raise prices on middle-class families by almost $4,000 a year. Well, instead of a Trump tax hike, we will pass a middle-class tax cut that will benefit more than 100 million Americans. Friends, I believe America cannot truly be prosperous unless Americans are fully able to make their own decisions about their own lives, especially on matters of heart and home. But tonight, in America, too many women are not able to make those decisions. And let's be clear about how we got here. Donald Trump handpicked members of the United States Supreme Court to take away reproductive freedom. And now he brags about it. In his words, quote, "I did it and I'm proud to have done it," end quote. Well, I'll tell you, over the past 2 years, I've traveled across our country, and women have told me their stories. Husbands and fathers have shared theirs. Stories of women miscarrying in a parking lot, developing sepsis, losing the ability to ever again have children, all because doctors are afraid they may go to jail for caring for their patients. Couples just trying to grow their family, cut off in the middle of IVF treatments. Children who have survived sexual assault, potentially being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. This is what's happening in our country because of Donald Trump. And understand, he is not done. As a part of his agenda, he and his allies would limit access to birth control, ban medication abortion, and enact a nationwide abortion ban with or without Congress. And get this, he plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their minds. And one must ask, why exactly is it that they don't trust women? Well, we trust women. We trust women. And when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. In this election, many other fundamental freedoms are at stake. The freedom to live safe from gun violence in our schools, communities, and places of worship. The freedom to love who you love openly and with pride. The freedom to breathe clean air and drink clean water and live free from the pollution that fuels the climate crisis. And the freedom that unlocks all the others, the freedom to vote. With this election, we finally have the opportunity to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. And let me be clear. After decades in law enforcement, I know the importance of safety and security, especially at our border. Last year, Joe and I brought together Democrats and conservative Republicans to write the strongest border bill in decades. The Border Patrol endorsed it. But Donald Trump believes a border deal would hurt his campaign. So he ordered his allies in Congress to kill the deal. Well, I refuse to play politics with our security. And here is my pledge to you. As president, I will bring back the bipartisan border security bill that he killed, and I will sign it into law. I know we can live up to our proud heritage as a nation of immigrants and reform our broken immigration system. We can create an earned pathway to citizenship and secure our border. And America, we must also be steadfast in advancing our security and values abroad. As Vice President, I have confronted threats to our security, negotiated with foreign leaders, strengthened our alliances, and engaged with our brave troops overseas. As Commander-in-Chief, I will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world. And I will fulfill our sacred obligation to care for our troops and their families, and I will always honor and never disparage their service and their sacrifice. I will make sure that we lead the world into the future on space and artificial intelligence, that America, not China, wins the competition for the 21st century, and that we strengthen, not abdicate, our global leadership. Trump, on the other hand, threatened to abandon NATO. He encouraged Putin to invade our allies, said Russia could, quote, do whatever the hell they want. 5 days before Russia attacked Ukraine, I met with President Zelensky to warn him about Russia's plan to invade. I helped mobilize a global response, over 50 countries, to defend against Putin's aggression. President, I will stand strong with Ukraine and our NATO allies. With respect to the war in Gaza, President Biden and I are working around the clock, because now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7, including unspeakable sexual violence and the massacre of young people at a music festival. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. Whatever action is necessary to defend our forces and our interests against Iran and Iran-backed terrorists. I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un, who are rooting for Trump, Because, you know, they know he is easy to manipulate with flattery and favors. They know Trump won't hold autocrats accountable because he wants to be an autocrat himself. And as president, I will never waver in defense of America's security and ideals, because in the enduring struggle between democracy and tyranny, I know where I stand and I know where the United States belongs. So fellow Americans, I love our country with all my heart. Everywhere I go, in everyone I meet, I see a nation that is ready to move forward, ready for the next step in the incredible journey that is America. I see an America where we hold fast to the fearless belief that built our nation and inspired the world, that here in this country, anything is possible, that nothing is out of reach. An America where we care for one another, look out for one another, and recognize that we have so much more in common than what separates us. That none of us has to fail for all of us to succeed. And that in unity there is strength. You know, our opponents in this race are out there every day denigrating America, talking about how terrible everything is. Well, my mother had another lesson she used to teach. Never let anyone tell you who you are. You show them who you are. America, let us show each other and the world who we are and what we stand for. Freedom, opportunity, compassion, dignity, fairness, and endless possibilities. We are the heirs to the greatest democracy in the history of the world. And on behalf of our children and our grandchildren and all those who sacrificed so dearly for our freedom and liberty, we must be worthy of this moment. It is now our turn to do what generations before us have done, guided by optimism and faith, to fight for this country we love, to fight for the ideals we cherish, and to uphold the awesome responsibility that comes with the greatest privilege on earth, the privilege and pride of being an American. So let's get out there, let's fight for it, let's get out there, let's vote for it, and together let us write the next great chapter in the most extraordinary story ever told. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you all.
Vice President Kamala Harris just making history, accepting for the first time as a woman of color the Democratic nomination for president. In a speech that ran almost 40 minutes long, she introduced herself as the child of an Indian and Black American, as a former prosecutor, as a senator, but also took aim at her opponent, Donald Trump, several times. At one point, saying Donald Trump is in many ways an unserious man, but saying the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Kamala Harris asked Americans to consider what would happen if we give him power again, as she made the case in the United Center here in Chicago on this final night of the Democratic convention, Joe, that they should put her in power instead.
That's right. As we now see Kamala Harris on Bloomberg TV with the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, spoke earlier this week, standing by for the big balloon drop. Of course, Kaylee, you're right, almost 40 minutes at the podium. And not only a biographical tale here, but counterpunching on just about every line of attack that we've heard from Donald Trump and Republicans aimed at Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, also on the stage now as the two couples get together here in showing the ticket that has now become formalized in Chicago. She talked a lot about Donald Trump, issue by issue, went through the border, went through his character, went to Israel as well, where she made some news, trying to appeal to both sides as they now wave to the crowd. Kaylee, there are more than 100,000 red, white, and blue balloons that are set to drop on these delegates tonight.
Which speaks to the festivities of the moment, and again, a historic moment that we are in. And as we reflect on the words we just heard from the vice president and Democratic nominee, back with us now, our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, and Jeanne Zaino, senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And you obviously are still hearing people going wild on the floor of the United Center. A lot of energy in that arena. As the balloons come down, you can see them on
1980,
Bloomberg
this
TV.
is not.
No, indeed. And we want to get thoughts now from Rick and Jeanne. Rick, you, of course, said that for much of this convention over the last several days, there hadn't been enough attacking Donald Trump. She talked about him by name for most of this speech. At one point, she said dictators are rooting for Trump because they know Trump won't hold autocrats accountable because he wants to be an autocrat himself. How did she strike the balance to you of attacking Donald Trump while also talking about herself?
Yeah, look, I think this was a fair balance, right? This was a sober speech. Last night we heard Oprah give a joyful speech. This was sober night, and she definitely took it to Donald Trump in a way, frankly, no other person on the stage in 4 nights did it. So I think she sees this as a contest between wills. She's ready to take him on directly. And I would say she took him on using his own words. She didn't quote the 2025 project. She quoted Donald Trump over and over again, deeming his positions unacceptable to the greater part of America.
And Donald Trump was, I won't say live tweeting, but live posting on his Truth Social platform. Jeanne, you had your eyes, I guess, on the oppo or the counter programming during this. But as the Democrat at the table, how did this strike you tonight? The tone and the balance between introducing herself, biography, and actual policy?
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating because there was an abrupt shift from the biography where she talked about her mother passed away in 2009, never saw her daughter achieve everything she has and how much of an impact she had on her life, all the way into this issue by issue by issue that you were just talking to Rick about, attack on what she says Donald Trump is going to do to this nation. And she pivoted from the watchword of the election so far, weird, to say they are simply out of their minds when it comes to reproductive rights. One of the many things that, if you look at Truth Social, that really drove Donald Trump mad, and he had a very extended screed on Truth Social about that.
Boy, yeah, that's for sure. He's really busy tonight, kind of like all of us watching this. Let's jump into the balloon drop right now with Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern, who is somewhere on that floor at the convention. Anne-Marie?
You want to come? Oh, it's absolutely electric on this floor. I just spoke to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer again following the speech, and he said it was pitch perfect. I think one thing that's very clear, Kamala Harris was able to come into this race and close that gap. It's like a relief bull market rally at this convention. Remember, this was really unthinkable about a month ago. Looking through some of the policies, though, whether it was the economy, talking about the fact that no one in the middle class will get a tax raise, reproductive rights, foreign policy or the border. What you see Kamala Harris doing is picking and choosing from the Biden-Harris campaign and administration that she was part of. And I think the next few weeks, as we go into that debate on September 10th, she's really going to get asked some hard questions for voters to really understand what differentiates her from Joe Biden.
All right, Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern on the floor as the balloons are bouncing around. Thank you so much. Still with us, our political panel, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino. At this point, we can basically declare, Rick, the convention and the party over. Kamala Harris now has to do this final stretch of 75 days to actually win this thing. Did she improve her odds with this speech tonight, or is this race still just as tight as it was before she took the podium?
Yeah, look, in a divided country the way it is, the race is going to be tight all the way to the end, right? No one is going to really gain a decisive advantage between now and Election Day. I would say the convention writ whole, I think, has improved her chances of coming out of here continuing to have the momentum. Remember, she came into the convention with a great head of a momentum. She was able to take on the mantle of the change candidate while being the vice president of an unpopular administration. And so I don't think she's lost a bit of that. She has established this speech as a change speech, even though it mimicked, as Anne-Marie said, almost every policy of the Biden administration. So right now she's getting away with it. We'll see how long she can make that last.
Well, we've got another week here of summer, then it's on to Labor Day, Jeanne, and a presidential debate on the 10th of September with such a small time frame here. You've referred to it, 75 days left. Do these two candidates just get hotel rooms in Pennsylvania and Michigan for the rest of this campaign?
They do. They are going to be living in those swing states, particularly, as you mentioned, Pennsylvania and Michigan, Wisconsin, adding North Carolina. And, you know, one small point to make, we noticed she did not wear white today like many of the women on the floor. And you guys were talking about the history making that this is tonight. She is not playing into that, at least with her dress today. She did not want to draw attention to her, you know, history making as the first woman of color to get this nomination in terms of wearing that suffragette white. She chose to go another way. She also didn't lean in on her role as vice president. A lot on prosecutor, not a lot on VP, and not a lot on Joe Biden. Once again, think of how many times we heard Donald Trump versus Joe Biden in that speech.
How true. Well, it's really something, Kaylee, as we watch these images now, and a chance for the Harris-Walz campaign to soak up the energy along with thousands of delegates who have made their way here to Chicago. This is it, the grand finale, as we have experienced together in the first draft of history on Bloomberg TV and radio. Now it's to the roadshow. Kaylee, and the first debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris.
And of course, she has promised that by the end of the month of August, she will be sitting down for a big interview. Tonight, we did see the vice president and Democratic nominee reading from a teleprompter.
That's right.
Answering questions from the press, from an interviewer, might be the next challenge ahead for her, in addition, of course, to competing in the swing states against Donald Trump as they both try to claim the presidency in November.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot, likely, about a convention bounce here as pollsters get into the field starting tomorrow. That might be the next leg in this story as we bring you daily coverage of this historic campaign on Bloomberg TV and radio. That does it for us here in Chicago, live at the 2024 Democratic National Convention. Thanks for spending the week with us. With Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew on Bloomberg TV and radio.